The chain had rusted around the gate so tightly that Walter had to brace the bolt cutters against his thigh. "Don't you dare!" Ruth said. He looked over his shoulder. At 79, Walter Mercer could still produce the expression of a boy caught halfway up a water tower. "I haven't done anything. You're about to use your bad leg as a workbench. It's my better leg. That is not the defense you think it is." Beyond him, Pine Hollow Campground waited under a wet April sky. 12 fresh site markers stood along the upper loop. The old office windows were clean. Smoke from the first test fire drifted between the pines, carrying the smell of oak and last year's leaves. On the road behind them, tires slowed over gravel. Ruth knew the sound of her daughter's car before she turned. Denise parked crooked beside the "closed for repairs" sign, got out without shutting her door, and stared at the two of them, the bolt cutters, and the new board hanging above the gate. 6 weeks earlier, Denise had said they could no longer live alone. Now, Walter closed the cutters around the chain. "Mom," Denise called, "what have you done?" Ruth rested her good hand on the gate and watched her husband squeeze. 6 weeks earlier, the most dangerous thing in Ruth's life had been a bag of wet leaves. She had gone outside in house slippers because the mail carrier had left a package on the far end of the porch. That was the sort of detail Denise would later seize upon, as if the slippers had acted independently and forced Ruth into them. The rain had stopped, but water still ticked from the gutters. Ruth carried the package under one arm and decided, for no useful reason, that the black walnut leaves near the steps looked untidy. She set the box on the porch rail, took the broom, and pushed once. Her left foot slid. There was no graceful attempt to recover. At 76, gravity did not negotiate. She came down on her right hand, struck one knee, and sat hard enough to knock the breath out of herself. For a few seconds, she heard only rainwater and the faint metallic rattle of the loose downspout Walter had promised to fix. Then the kitchen door opened. "Ruth?" "I'm admiring the drainage." Walter appeared in the doorway, wearing one sock and carrying a butter knife. She looked at the knife. "Were you planning to defend me from the weather?" "I was making toast. Then thank heaven you arrived armed." He did not laugh. His eyes moved over her with the quick, frightened attention he tried to disguise as irritation. "Can you stand?" "Yes." "Have you tried?" "No." "Then we don't know that." They had been married 54 years. Long enough for love to acquire the tone of an argument conducted while looking for the other person's coat. Walter set down the knife and came carefully onto the porch. He had no business lifting her. They both knew it. His right knee had been replaced, his left knee had opinions, and 3 months earlier he had nearly dropped a 50-pound sack of birdseed because 2 fingers in his right hand had gone numb. So Ruth rolled onto her knees, which hurt more than she expected, and Walter brought over the wooden porch chair. She used the seat to push herself upright while he steadied the chair with both hands. "There," she said, after she was standing. Her wrist was already swelling. Walter saw it. "Get your purse. It's a sprain. Get your purse. You don't know that. I know what a wrist is supposed to look like." She went inside because it was easier than watching fear turn him sharp. Urgent care took 2 hours. No fracture, the physician's assistant said. Only a bad sprain and bruising. Ruth was given a stiff brace and instructions not to lift anything heavy for at least a week. Walter listened as though being briefed before surgery. Ruth asked whether a cast would have come in a more flattering color. On the drive home, Walter kept both hands high on the steering wheel. He had driven that mountain road in snow, fog, and once during a summer hailstorm that shattered the windshield of a camper's station wagon. That afternoon, with the pavement dry, he drove 10 miles under the speed limit. "You called Denise," Ruth said. "I texted her. That's calling with your thumbs. She worries when we don't tell her things. She worries when the grocery store changes the soup aisle. She's our daughter. That has been established." Walter's mouth tightened. He had been quieter since they closed Pine Hollow. Not peaceful. Quiet was what people called a room after the last person worth talking to had left. Ruth turned toward the passenger window. Through the bare trees, she caught pieces of the lower campground road. It curved away toward the creek, hidden under pine needles and 3 years of neglect. The entrance sign was still visible from the highway if a person knew where to look, though the green paint had faded until Pine Hollow seemed to be dissolving into the wood. They had closed after the September storm, tore a channel through the lower road, and filled the bathhouse with brown water. One season, they had told everyone. Just one season to repair the drainage, replace the ruined fixtures, and let Walter's knee recover. Then the repair estimate arrived. Then Walter's other knee began hurting. Then Ruth discovered how expensive it was to insure an empty campground, and how exhausting it was to reopen something properly instead of merely unlocking it. 3 years passed with the gate chained. At home, a silver SUV stood beside the farmhouse. "Oh no," Ruth said. Walter leaned forward over the wheel. "She got here fast. She lives 2 hours away. She drives like you used to. I drove with purpose." Denise came down the porch steps before Walter had stopped the truck. She was 51, compact and polished, with Ruth's narrow chin and none of Ruth's patience for hair that refused to behave. She had changed out of her work clothes but still wore the small gold earrings she wore at the hospital. Her eyes went straight to the brace. "Why didn't you call me?" Ruth opened the door. "Hello to you too." Denise reached up to help. Ruth ignored the hand and stepped down by herself, immediately hating how childish the gesture felt. Did they x-ray it? Yes. Any fracture? No. Did you hit your head? If I had, your father would have led with that. Walter had come around the truck. I asked her. She says no. You asked her? Ruth looked between them. I am standing right here, and my hearing remains one of my least charming strengths. Denise took a breath through her nose. At work, that breath probably caused departments to reorganize themselves. I'm glad you're all right. There. Wasn't that nicer? I was scared. That landed where Ruth did not want it to. She looked away and saw the porch. The wet leaves had been swept into a neat pile. The package was inside. The loose board beside the second step had a strip of yellow tape across it. You taped my porch? I nearly went through that board. It's been loose for a month. Denise stared at her. Ruth heard the mistake only after it was out. A month, Denise repeated. Approximately. And neither of you fixed it? I was going to, Walter said. When? Walter glanced at the board as if it might supply a date. Denise turned and walked into the house. They followed her to the kitchen. Every overhead light was on. 2 cans of soup, a jar of mustard, and 3 bottles of salad dressing stood on the counter beside the trash can. Ruth stopped. What are you doing? Checking expiration dates. In my kitchen? The mustard expired last August. Mustard doesn't know what month it is. The soup is from 2 years ago. That soup has survived things. Denise picked up a can between 2 fingers. This is not funny. It was a little funny. Walter eased into his chair and rubbed his left knee. Denise noticed. Of course she noticed. Her eyes moved to the stack of unopened mail on the sideboard, the dish towel hanging too close to the stove, and the old step stool Ruth used to reach the top cupboards. Ruth saw her own house change under that inspection. The mail became evidence, the towel became a fire, the stool became a broken hip waiting politely in the corner. Sit down, Ruth said. I'll make coffee. You're not supposed to lift anything. A coffee mug does not qualify as freight. I'll do it. Denise began opening cupboards, looking for filters in the kitchen where she had grown up. Ruth watched her check the wrong drawer twice. They're beside the refrigerator, Ruth said. I know. You very clearly do not. Walter made a sound that might have been a cough hiding a laugh. Denise found the filters and filled the machine. She poured too much water, spilled some on the counter, wiped it with 3 paper towels, and said nothing. Her movements had the efficient violence of a person trying not to cry. Ruth sat. That frightened her more than the fall had. Denise spent the night in the room that still held a white dresser she had painted blue at 16 and then white again at 17. By breakfast, she had scheduled a carpenter to repair the porch, placed 2 bags of leaves in the truck bed, and made a list titled House Items in the notebook she carried for work. Ruth found the list beside the coffee pot. At the bottom, Denise had written, driving. Ruth drew a firm line through that one. Denise came in wearing Walter's old canvas jacket over her sweater. Did you cross that out? I considered setting it on fire. Dad told me he avoids driving after dark because his hands go numb. Walter, standing at the sink, became deeply interested in rinsing one plate. 2 fingers, he said, on the hand that controls the car. Both hands control the car, Ruth said. That is somehow worse. A truck rolled into the yard. Ruth recognized Mark's white pickup, though the magnetic sign for Mercer Homeworks had been removed from the door. Mark claimed he took it off because he planned to replace it with a painted logo. He had been planning that for 8 months. He came through the back door without knocking, carrying a cardboard tray of coffee and wearing the expensive work boots he saved for giving estimates. "Well," he said, setting down the tray. "Who fell off what?" "No one fell off anything," Ruth said. "She fell on the porch," Walter told him. "That's falling off standing." Mark bent and kissed Ruth's cheek. At 47, he still had Walter's broad shoulders, though his face had grown softer and more tired. He smelled of sawdust and peppermint gum. "You okay, Mom?" "She's okay," Denise said. Ruth looked at her. "I have appointed Denise my official mouth." "Good. That'll save time." Mark handed Ruth a coffee. "Decaf. I'd rather drink the brace." He grinned, and for one moment they were themselves again. Then another vehicle came up the driveway. It was a dark sedan Ruth did not recognize. A woman in a camel-colored coat stepped out, opened the trunk, and removed a leather folder. Walter slowly put down the plate. Denise's expression changed. "Mark." "What? Who is that?" Mark looked toward the window, then at his parents. His surprise arrived half a second too late. "She's just here to take a look," he said. "At what?" Ruth asked. No one answered. The woman approached the porch carefully, avoiding the yellow tape. She smiled through the glass in the back door, uncertain whether she should knock. Mark lowered his voice. "Before everybody gets upset, she's not listing anything today." Ruth set the decaf on the table. "Listing what?" Mark glanced at Denise, as if his sister might help him explain. Denise did not. "The property," he said. "The house, the campground. All of it, potentially." Walter's chair scraped against the floor. Mark raised both hands. "You don't have to do anything. I thought we could get a realistic number, that's all." "You brought a real estate agent to our breakfast?" Ruth asked. "It's 10:30. Then that makes perfect sense." Denise shut her notebook. "I told you we were discussing options. This is an option. This is an ambush." Mark's face hardened. "You're the one making lists about call buttons? Because Mom got hurt. And if she'd broken her hip? If Dad's hand went numb on the highway? How many warnings do you need?" The woman in the camel coat knocked gently and then pretended to study the gutters. Walter remained standing, one hand flat on the table. Ruth wanted him to tell Mark to leave. She wanted the old Walter, the man whose anger had once sent a drunk camper backing out of the office with his shirt still unbuttoned. But Walter looked at his children, then at his swollen knuckles, and seemed to shrink without moving. Denise saw it too. Her voice softened, which somehow made the next words worse. "We're not trying to take anything from you. We're trying to be realistic. You two can't live alone out here anymore." The refrigerator motor clicked off. In the sudden quiet, Ruth could hear the woman's shoes on the porch as she decided whether to knock again. Walter looked down at his hands. Ruth removed the brace because it had become too tight. Her wrist was purple along the thumb, the skin puffed and shiny. She placed the brace neatly beside Mark's coffee. "Tell that woman," she said, "that she has driven up the wrong road." Neither of her children moved. Ruth stood, opened the back door, and smiled at the waiting agent with such courtesy that the woman smiled back in relief. "I'm sorry you came all this way," Ruth said. "There's been a misunderstanding." Behind her, Mark said, "Mom." Ruth closed the door on him and walked past the woman into the wet morning. She did not yet know about the envelope waiting at Pine Hollow's gate. She only knew that everyone inside her kitchen had begun speaking about her life, as if she had already left it. The real estate agent followed Ruth down the steps. "Mrs. Mercer?" Ruth kept walking. "I truly didn't mean to intrude." "Then you have a promising opportunity to stop." The woman halted beside the sedan. Up close, she was younger than Ruth had thought, perhaps 40, with rain gathering on the shoulders of her coat. Embarrassment had pulled all the professionalism out of her face. Mark said everyone was aware of the appointment. Mark is often aware of things slightly before they become true. "I can leave you my card. You could." The woman put one hand on her leather folder, considered the card, then let her hand fall. "I'll tell him to call me if circumstances change. They won't." Ruth headed toward the narrow road that led behind the farmhouse. Her slippers darkened in the wet grass. The brace remained on the kitchen table, and cold air made her injured wrist throb with each heartbeat. "Mom," Mark called from the porch. She walked faster. The campground entrance was nearly a quarter-mile away, far enough for solitude and close enough that every step felt like a decision other people would criticize. The old road passed the equipment shed, crossed a shallow rise, and descended between two rows of white pines Walter had planted when Mark was still small enough to ride on the tractor fender. A car door shut behind her. The sedan started and retreated down the driveway. Good, Ruth thought. Then she heard Walter's uneven footsteps. She did not turn. You forgot your coat. You forgot shoes. I have shoes. Those are slippers with ambitions. He caught up beside the equipment shed, breathing harder than he would have admitted. He had put on the brown cardigan he kept over his chair. One side was buttoned into the wrong hole. You shouldn't be walking this far, he said. I fell 3 feet from our kitchen. Proximity has not protected me. Your wrist is attached to my arm, which is attached to me, and the entire arrangement is going for a walk. Walter rubbed his jaw. Gray stubble rasped under his fingers. Mark should not have brought her. No, Denise didn't know. No, she's frightened. Then she should scream into a towel like a civilized person. Walter looked back toward the house. We need to talk about some things. Ruth stopped. That sentence in Walter's voice had preceded new roofs, dead water heaters, knee operations, and the closing of Pine Hollow. It had never once produced a conversation she enjoyed. Did you know about the real estate agent? No. Have you spoken to Mark about selling? Walter looked toward the trees. The answer was not yes, but it was close enough to make her face hot. He asked what we thought the place might be worth, he said. A month ago, maybe. I told him I didn't know. You could have said it was not for sale. I did. Did you say those words? I said we weren't ready to discuss it. That is what men say when they want to postpone an argument until the women involved have died. For God's sake, Ruth, you left a door open. I didn't invite anybody through it. You didn't close it either. Walter's face changed. He was not a man who enjoyed being accused of weakness, especially where he suspected weakness might exist. What would you have had me tell him? He asked. That we're going to run Pine Hollow until we're 100. That I'll repair the lower road myself? You want to go look at the bathhouse? Half the floor has to come out. The septic line needs checking, the office roof leaks. We've been paying taxes and insurance on a business that hasn't taken in $1 for 3 years. So sell it. I didn't say that. You're practicing. He stepped closer. I am trying to tell the truth. No, you are trying to make surrender sound like bookkeeping. Walter's cheeks flushed. And you think being mad changes what we can do? It changes what I'm willing to let Mark do. Mark isn't the only problem. There it was, not spoken cruelly. That might have been easier. Ruth stared at the man she had married before his hair turned gray, before his shoulders stooped, before his body became a list of calculations. He had coffee on the front of his cardigan. He had followed her in one sock and house shoes. He was tired. So was she. What do you want? She asked. Walter looked beyond her, toward the hidden campground. I don't know. That's a poor reason to let our children decide. I didn't say they should decide. You didn't say they shouldn't. A wind moved through the pines, spilling drops from branch to branch. Walter flinched as cold water struck the back of his neck. Ruth resumed walking. The entrance gate appeared around the next curve, green paint blistered, chain sagging between two posts. A weathered plywood sign hung from wire, closed for repairs. Walter had painted it 3 Septembers earlier. The word repairs had once sounded temporary. Now the sign seemed sarcastic. Ruth pushed a handful of wet hair from her forehead. Come back to the house, Walter said. At least put on a coat. She went to the gate. Something pale lay on the gravel just inside it. At first she thought it was trash. Then she saw her name written across the front of a cream envelope. The handwriting was large and uncertain, as if written against a steering wheel. Ruth reached between the metal bars, but the envelope lay beyond her fingertips. She tried again with her left hand. Don't strain that wrist. Walter came beside her. Move. He knelt slowly and pushed one arm under the gate. His fingers brushed the corner, nudging it farther away. Wonderful, Ruth said. I've almost got it. You've almost mailed it to Tennessee. Walter lowered himself another inch. His cardigan caught on the chain. If you're going to provide commentary, make it useful. Your pants are wet. I know my pants are wet. He trapped the envelope beneath 2 fingers and dragged it toward them. Getting upright took longer. Ruth held his elbow, and neither commented on who was helping whom. The envelope was damp but sealed. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a folded sheet of yellow stationery and a photograph. Ruth recognized the fire ring before she recognized any of the people around it. Site 23, near the creek. where Walter had built a wide stone apron after a guest melted the soles off a pair of sandals. 4 couples sat in folding chairs, holding red plastic cups. Everyone looked sunburned and happy. Ruth and Walter were at the edge of the frame. Ruth's hair was still brown. Walter wore the ridiculous fishing hat Mark had given him one Christmas. The couple in front were Evelyn and Arthur Price. Arthur had been a quiet man with a mustache and an impressive ability to burn meat without warming the center. Evelyn talked enough for both of them. They had spent 1 week at Pine Hollow every October for nearly 20 years, always in the same silver trailer, and always complaining that the maple leaves turned 1 week earlier the year before. Ruth unfolded the note. Dear Ruth and Walter, I drove past today because it would have been Arthur's and my 43rd anniversary. I don't suppose that makes much sense, but nothing I've done this year has made much sense. I wanted to see Pine Hollow. I thought maybe the gate would be open. I sat there long enough to look suspicious, but no one arrested me. Do you think you will ever open again? After Arthur died, every room in our house became a room where something had ended. Pine Hollow is one of the few places I remember as a beginning. We met the Carmichaels there. Arthur learned to back the trailer without threatening divorce. I learned I could sleep through a thunderstorm. If you open, even for a little while, I would like to come back. If you don't, thank you for all the years you did. Evelyn Ruth read it twice. Walter stood close enough that his shoulder touched hers. He did not ask to see the note. He looked at the photograph instead. I hated that hat, Ruth said. You bought me that hat. Mark bought it. I tried to lose it. You put it in the truck before every fishing trip, so the fish would know whom to avoid. Walter smiled. The smile vanished quickly. Arthur died? Apparently. When? She doesn't say. Ruth looked down the empty campground road. From the gate, they could see only the first bend and the top of the wooden office sign. Beyond it were 47 sites they had once known by sound. Site 8 had the loose water connection that whistled. Acorns struck the metal roof of cabin 2 like thrown stones. Owls nested near the upper loop, and in late summer, the creek smell reached the office before the afternoon rain. 3 years without campers had changed the silence. It was no longer restful. It felt sealed. Walter took the letter from her when she offered it. His eyes moved slowly over Evelyn's words. You think she came alone? He asked. She drove here. That isn't what I meant. I know. He refolded the page along its original crease. Denise will come looking for us. Let her. You walked out in slippers after spraining your wrist. I am providing supporting evidence for her case. That earned a quiet laugh. Ruth leaned against the gate. The metal was cold through her sweater. Do you remember opening weekend? Which one? The first one. Everything flooded. The toilets backed up. Your mother arrived with 6 pies and told every guest we didn't know what we were doing. She was correct. Mark got his head stuck between the porch rails. Ruth looked at him. Walter blinked. He was 19. He was drunk. Still got stuck. They laughed and the sound startled something in the brush. For a moment, Ruth could see it all. Not as it had been, polished by distance, but as it truly was. Mud tracked through the office. Quarrels over quiet hours. Towels stolen from the bathhouse. Walter cursing at water lines. Ruth smiling at guests while calculating whether the electric bill would clear. Pine Hollow had not been paradise. It had been work. That mattered. Not the lower loop, she said. Walter was still reading the last line of the note. What? The lower road is too badly damaged. We couldn't use the creek sites. Use them for what? The upper loop stayed dry. He folded the letter again, more carefully. Ruth. 12 sites, maybe the office, 1 bathhouse if the plumbing isn't ruined. You just accused me of avoiding the truth, I remember. This place needs money. We have some. We have retirement savings. Yes. I have been told we are retired. You can't even use your right hand. For a week, I can't do the repairs. I didn't say you could. That hurt him. She saw it land and wished she had shaped the sentence differently. Walter returned the letter to the envelope. Then who? Ruth looked at the gate, at the chain, and at the road disappearing around the bend. I don't know yet. Your plan has a strong foundation. It is 11 minutes old. You want to reopen a campground because Evelyn Price left a note? No? Ruth tucked the envelope beneath her sweater to protect it from the rain. I want to find out what it would take because our children brought a real estate agent to breakfast. That sounds much wiser, and because Evelyn left a note. Walter studied her with the worn, wary tenderness of a man who knew exactly how dangerous she could become once humiliation found a practical task. "We would need help," he said. "Yes." "Paid help." "Yes." "Someone would have to inspect every site." "Yes." "The office roof. Leaks." "You mentioned it. And if we look at the numbers and they don't work, then they don't work." "You would accept that?" "I would dislike it with dignity." He snorted. Ruth touched the "closed for repairs" sign. One corner had come loose from its wire and knocked softly against the gate. "Not forever," she said. "Not 47 sites. Not the way we did it before." Walter gazed through the bars. Behind them, Denise called their names from the rise. Ruth waited for him to turn back toward the farmhouse. Instead, he reached through the gate and lifted the old sign so he could read the faded words beneath the moss. "One bathhouse," he said. "We start there. If the pipes froze, this conversation is over." Ruth smiled. "We are not having a conversation," she said. "We're only looking." "That," Walter said, "is exactly how you bought this place." Denise reached them, breathing hard and carrying Ruth's coat. "You left without this. I noticed halfway here and chose not to come back. That sentence is the reason I made a list." Denise draped the coat around Ruth's shoulders before Ruth could object. Then she noticed the envelope beneath Ruth's sweater and the way Walter was holding up the "closed for repairs" sign. "What are you doing?" "Looking at a sign," Walter said. "I can see that." "Then we're making progress." Denise turned to Ruth. Mark left. "I assume his real estate agent was driving. He sent her away in her own car. A promising start. He's embarrassed. He should try inconvenience. It lasts longer." Denise glanced through the gate. "What's in the envelope?" "A note from Evelyn Price." "Who is Evelyn Price?" "She and her husband camped here for years." "Why did she leave a note at a locked campground?" "She wanted to know if we were reopening." Denise gave a small, incredulous laugh. "You're not!" The words were ordinary. That made them worse. Ruth buttoned her coat one-handed. "Did you come all this way to issue announcements?" "I came because Dad texted that you fell, and you found me standing. I found you a quarter-mile from the house in wet slippers, without a coat, discussing an abandoned bathhouse." "Closed," Walter said. "Not abandoned." Denise looked at him. "Dad, the sign is growing moss." Walter released it. The plywood struck the gate with a hollow knock. Ruth saw Denise regret the remark. She also saw that regret failed to change anything. "We're going back," Denise said. "You may." "So, may you." Ruth nearly refused. Then her wrist pulsed. Walter shifted his weight off his left leg, and a cold drop slid from her hair down the back of her neck. She started toward the farmhouse. Denise walked beside her, matching her pace without offering an arm. That restraint was probably costing her. "What did Mark tell the agent?" Ruth asked. "That you had been considering selling." "I had been considering mustard." "He misunderstood Dad." Walter, a few steps behind them, said, "I wasn't clear." Denise stopped. "You told me you said no. I told Mark we weren't ready to discuss it." Ruth kept walking. Denise caught up. "Mom, I have already held the hearing. Your father was found irritating. You know Mark. If there's uncertainty, he fills it in with whatever he wants." "Yes." "He shouldn't have brought her." "No. But the fact that he handled it badly doesn't make the underlying concern wrong." Ruth turned. "You took that sentence around the barn to deliver it from the back." Denise folded her arms. "You got hurt." "I got hurt once. You called me last month because Dad didn't come in from the equipment shed. He was out there for 4 hours." "I was fixing the mower," Walter said. "You had fallen asleep in a lawn chair. I had finished fixing the mower." Denise pointed toward him without looking away from Ruth. "This is what I mean." "What you mean," Ruth said, "is that every foolish thing we do now has become a symptom. At your ages, foolish things have bigger consequences. Foolish things have always had consequences. That is how Mark came to own a boat." Walter coughed into his hand. Denise closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, anger had given way to something less comfortable. "I cannot keep waiting for the call," she said. Ruth's reply stopped before it reached her mouth. The three of them stood among the pines. Water tapped the leaves. Far down the hill, a truck changed gears on the highway. "What call?" Walter asked. "The one where one of you has been lying on the floor for 12 hours. The one where you've driven off the road. The one where I have to get here and make decisions because neither of you would let me make smaller ones before it became an emergency." Ruth stared at her daughter's face. Denise looked furious, but her hands were shaking. "We never asked you to wait for that," Ruth said. "No, you just made sure I knew it was possible." Denise resumed walking. Ruth followed more slowly. She wanted to dismiss the fear as another item on the list beside grab bars and call buttons. But she remembered phoning Denise about Walter in the shed, how quickly relief had become annoyance once he was found sleeping. She had not apologized. She had complained about the mower. At the house, the real estate agent's tire marks remained in the gravel. Mark's coffee tray sat on the kitchen table with one cup missing. Beside it lay Ruth's brace and Denise's notebook. Denise picked up the brace. "Put this back on. It pinches. Because your wrist is swelling. Sit." Ruth sat. Denise loosened the straps, eased the brace over Ruth's hand, and fastened it with more gentleness than her face suggested. Her fingers were cool and precise. Ruth remembered those same fingers at 7 years old, untangling fishing line while Walter swore under his breath. Even then, Denise had believed patience was something other people required from her. "There," Denise said. "Thank you." Denise looked up, surprised enough to make Ruth ashamed. Walter began heating the coffee no one had finished. Ruth slipped Evelyn's photograph from the envelope and set it on the table. Denise glanced at it. "Is that you?" "Unfortunately. You look like me. I had hoped you'd escaped." Denise leaned closer. "Dad looks ridiculous." "It was the hat," Ruth said. "It was not the hat," Walter said from the counter. Denise smiled despite herself. For 10 quiet minutes, they drank reheated coffee. No one mentioned the campground. Ruth knew that meant all three of them were thinking about it. Denise left after lunch, but not before arranging for the carpenter to come, Monday. Ruth allowed the porch repair because refusing would have transformed one loose board into a constitutional crisis. She rejected the emergency call button and promised to consider a grab bar. At the truck, Denise hugged Walter first. When she hugged Ruth, she was careful of the wrist. "Please don't do anything because you're angry at us," she said. Ruth looked over her daughter's shoulder toward the road beyond the equipment shed. "I have made nearly all my best decisions while angry. That is not reassuring. It wasn't intended to be." After Denise drove away, Walter found the campground keys in the bottom drawer of the office desk in the farmhouse. They were attached to a wooden disc painted yellow, large enough to prevent guests from accidentally taking them home. Someone had written Bath, one on the disc in black marker. Ruth recognized her own handwriting, but not the year she had written it. "We're only checking the pipes," Walter said. "You have mentioned that. And the roof." "Yes, and the electric." "We should not touch the electric. I know how to check a breaker panel. You know how to open one." He put on his work coat. "Are you coming?" Ruth held up the brace. That was not an answer. It was a visual aid. They took the old utility cart because the campground road was too far for Walter's knee, and Ruth's slippers had already achieved their daily mileage. The cart had not been started since autumn. Walter turned the key. It clicked twice. "Battery," he said. "Strong inspection so far." He gave her a look, connected the charger, and 20 minutes later, the cart shuddered awake in a cloud of dust and mouse nest odor. The side opening beside the gate was meant for foot traffic, but Walter angled the cart through with half an inch to spare. Ruth kept her injured hand tucked against her chest and refused to close her eyes. The office came first, a low brown building with a green metal roof. One gutter sagged. Dead vines covered the porch railing. The brass bell beside the door was spotted black, but still in place. Ruth pressed it. The ring echoed through the empty campground. Walter unlocked the office. The door stuck against something inside, and he leaned his shoulder into it before Ruth could stop him. A swollen cardboard box scraped across the floor. The smell arrived first: dust, damp wood, and mice. "Oh," Ruth said. Walter stared at a dark water stain spreading across the ceiling near the front window. Roof leak got worse. The counter was covered in droppings. A strand of silver tinsel hung from the bulletin board, left from their final Christmas in July weekend. The reservation computer sat beneath a plastic cover. Shelves held sun-faded postcards, citronella candles, and 4 bottles of sunscreen that were probably old enough to vote. Ruth picked up the red desk bell and pressed it. Nothing happened. Walter took it, unscrewed the base, and adjusted the striker with a thumbnail. The bell gave a weak ding. "Fixed," he said. "One item complete." They laughed, but the room did not become less ruined. Ruth walked behind the counter. Her old stool remained by the wall. So did the height chart where campers had measured floodwater, though the last line marked a storm from 6 years before the one that finally closed them. A ledger rested beneath the counter. Ruth opened it with her left hand. Names filled the pages in blue and black ink. Arrivals, departures, payments, site preferences, warnings. Don't put near dogs. Needs 30 AMP. Brings own firewood, even though told not to. She found price, Evelyn Arthur, on 3 consecutive October pages. The most recent entry included a phone number. Could be disconnected, Walter said. Could be. You're not calling her today. I can't write down a reservation with this hand. That is not what I said. Ruth closed the book. They continued to the upper bathhouse. The door unlocked, but damp had buckled the bottom edge. Walter pushed it open with his hip. Inside, the air smelled stale, not rotten. A dead moth lay in one sink. The mirrors were cloudy. One stall door hung crooked, and mineral stains ringed the faucets, but the ceiling was dry. Walter went to the service closet and opened the main valve a fraction. The pipes groaned. Ruth held her breath. Somewhere inside the wall, water knocked twice. A faucet spat brown, coughed, and began to run. Walter opened another, then another. At the third sink, water sprayed sideways from a cracked supply line and struck him across the chest. He shouted and grabbed for the valve. His shoe slipped. Ruth caught the back of his coat with her left hand and pulled while he clung to the sink. The spray soaked his hair, his face, and the wall behind him before he managed to shut it off. For several seconds, they stood frozen. Then Ruth laughed. It came out too loudly, half relief and half nerves. Walter wiped water from his eyes. You find this funny? You said if the pipes froze, the conversation was over. That pipe is broken. It is enthusiastically not frozen. Walter looked at his soaked shirt, then at her. He began to laugh too. They sat on the bathhouse bench until their breathing settled. Walter's wet hair stuck up in gray points. Ruth's wrist hurt. The broken pipe dripped into the sink with slow, expensive confidence. We need Luis, Walter said. Ruth looked at him. You think he'd come? He might come. Staying after he sees this is a separate question. Luis Mendoza had worked at Pine Hollow for 11 years before the closure. He could repair a pump, calm an angry guest, and tell Walter he was wrong without turning it into a fight. The last time they had spoken, Luis had been starting his own repair business 2 counties over. Walter took out his phone. His wet fingers would not wake the screen. Ruth held out her left hand. He hesitated, then gave it to her. Luis answered on the 4th ring. Mr. Mercer? The surprise in his voice made Walter sit straighter. Luis, how are you? Good. Is everything okay? Walter looked at Ruth, at the cracked line, and at the row of sinks waiting in the dim bathhouse. No, he said. But it might be. Luis was quiet for a moment. That sounds like a Walter answer, he said. Ruth heard him clearly through the phone. It is. He is also wet. Mrs. Mercer? Hello, Luis? Why is he wet? A pipe objected to inspection. Walter reached for the phone. Ruth held it away. We're looking at the upper bathhouse, she continued. Only looking. We would like someone who knows what he's doing to tell us how terrible it is. You're at Pine Hollow? In bathhouse 1. Another silence followed, this one longer. You reopening? Luis asked. Walter stopped trying to take the phone. Ruth glanced at him. We're determining whether that is a foolish idea or an impossible one. Those aren't the same? We hope not. Luis laughed softly. I can come by tomorrow, late afternoon. We will pay you for the inspection. I didn't say anything about money. I did. Mrs. Mercer, if you come as a friend, Walter will feed you coffee and follow you around explaining things you already understand. If you come as a professional, he might listen. Walter muttered something under his breath. What did he say? Luis asked. He has begun listening. 4 o'clock. We'll be here. Luis paused. I'm glad you called. After the line went dead, Ruth gave Walter back his phone. You make me sound difficult, he said. You were present for 11 years. Luis formed his own conclusions. Walter peeled his wet shirt away from his chest. We should turn off the main. I believe the bathhouse has expressed that preference. He closed the valve, then marked the cracked line with a strip of red tape found in the service closet. The tape had lost most of its adhesive, so he tied it into a knot. Ruth watched his fingers struggle with the end. "Let me," she said. "I have it." The tape slipped loose. Walter tried again. His thumb and first two fingers worked, but the last two curled stiffly against his palm. He finally secured the knot with his teeth. Neither of them mentioned it. They rode back in the utility cart, carrying the ledger, Evelyn's letter, and the damp yellow key disc. At the side opening, Walter misjudged the angle and scraped the right fender against the gatepost. Ruth looked at the white line on the paint. "One inspection," she said. "One plumbing failure, one collision. The gatepost moved. It's been waiting 3 years for its chance." In the farmhouse mudroom, Walter stripped to his undershirt while Ruth found towels. His chest was pale and narrower than it had been even the previous summer. A bruise the size of a plum darkened his ribs where he had struck the sink. "You hit harder than you said. It looks worse than it is. That sentence has been banned in this house. You used it at urgent care. I was grandfathered in." She pressed 2 fingers carefully around the bruise. Walter sucked air through his teeth. "You may have cracked something. I did not crack anything. You know what a rib is supposed to look like?" He gave her a flat stare. Ruth smiled, but worry had already found a place beneath her breastbone. They could not reopen Pine Hollow by treating their bodies as equipment they were willing to break. That was exactly the kind of bargain Denise believed they would make. Walter put on a dry flannel shirt. Ruth tucked the campground ledger into the cabinet beside the telephone, not back in the office. It felt less like stealing from their own business than bringing home a sleeping thing. Mark called before dinner. Ruth let the phone ring 4 times, then answered. "I sent her away," he said, without greeting. "She left under her own power. I apologized to Dad." "You called his cell?" "He called me." Ruth looked toward the living room. Walter sat with a heating pad against his ribs, pretending to read the newspaper. "What did he say?" "That I got ahead of things." "You got ahead of things in a car with a real estate agent, I know." "Do you?" Mark exhaled. She could hear road noise behind him. "I should have talked to you first. You should not have talked to her at all. I was trying to get information." "For whom?" "For all of us." That phrase has done a great deal of unpaid labor today. "Mom, whether you like it or not, we need to know what happens with the property. After we die?" "That isn't what I said." "No, you prefer doors left open." Walter lowered the newspaper. Mark went quiet. Ruth pictured him in his pickup, jaw set, peppermint gum working between his teeth. "I'm sorry you fell," he said. "Thank you. I mean it, I know." Another pause. "You're not going to do something crazy with the campground, are you?" Ruth glanced at Walter. He folded the newspaper and waited. "We inspected a bathroom." "What does that mean?" "It means your father is changing his shirt." "Why?" "Goodbye, Mark." She hung up. Walter raised an eyebrow. Subtle. "I didn't tell him anything untrue. You invited 6 questions. He arrived with an agent. He can survive uncertainty. They ate canned tomato soup for dinner. Ruth selected a can that did not expire until the following year and placed it in the center of the table for inspection. Walter opened it because of her wrist. Neither said much. Afterward, Ruth found Evelyn's number in the ledger and dialed. A recording said the number was no longer in service. She tried the address listed beside it, searching on Walter's old tablet. The screen responded slowly, and the campground's internet connection had been canceled years earlier, so she used the weak signal from the farmhouse router. The search produced a retirement announcement, a church newsletter, and an obituary for Arthur Samuel Price. He had died 11 months earlier. The obituary photograph showed him in a suit Ruth had never seen, serious and clean-shaven. She preferred the campground photograph, where his mustache was crooked and he held a pair of burned tongs. There was no telephone number for Evelyn. Ruth set the tablet down. The envelope had no return address, only her name. Evelyn might have driven 2 hours or 20 minutes. She could have moved. "You'll find her," Walter said from behind his newspaper. Ruth had not realized he was watching. "I may not." She found us. The next afternoon, Luis arrived at 3:48 in a dark blue service van with Mendoza Repair Maintenance painted neatly on the side. The lettering made Ruth unexpectedly proud. He stepped out wearing work pants, a clean gray shirt, and the same leather tool belt he had worn at Pine Hollow, though several tools were newer. At 54, he had more silver in his beard and less patience in his walk. He hugged Ruth carefully, shook Walter's hand, and looked at the brace. "I heard about the wrist," he said. "News travels quickly through wet men." Luis looked at Walter. "Pipe got you?" "Supply line." You turned on a system that sat empty 3 winters? I opened it a fraction. Water understands fractions. Walter's mouth twitched. Ruth hired you to be irritating. She pays extra. They rode to the upper loop in Luis's van because he refused to squeeze it through the side opening. Walter unlocked the gate for the first time in months, kneeling with difficulty to work oil into the padlock. The chain came loose in his hands, leaving rust across his palms. Luis drove slowly, looking left and right without offering judgment. The upper sights were buried under needles, but mostly level. 2 power pedestals leaned. 1 picnic table had split down the center. A pine limb rested across the gravel at Site 5, too large for Ruth and Walter to move. At the bathhouse, Luis went straight to the service closet. He inspected the broken line, tested the shutoff valves, opened access panels, and wrote notes on a yellow pad. Walter followed close behind. That faucet always lost pressure when the showers ran, he said. I know. The heater was replaced in. I installed it. It could still be good. It could be a submarine. Let me test it. Walter stepped back. Ruth waited on the bench while the 2 men worked. Luis moved with the economy Walter once had, using his whole body only when the task required it. He did not hurry. He did not dramatize damage. When he found another cracked line behind the women's shower wall, he merely wrote it down. They inspected the office, 12 sites, the power pedestals, the upper road, and the dump station. Luis refused to test the electrical service until it was dry and would not make any promise about the septic system without having it pumped and inspected. By sunset, they sat at the office counter with 3 cups of coffee from a thermos Ruth had brought. Luis placed his yellow pad between them. This is not an estimate, he said. This is a list of what has to happen before I can give you an estimate. Walter leaned over it. The office roof doesn't need full replacement. Luis tapped the water stain. I wrote repair. We can patch that corner. I wrote repair. I have leftover metal behind the shed. Walter, I'm saying we already own material. Luis put down his pen. You asked me to come as a professional. Ruth held her cup near her mouth to hide a smile. Walter sat back. I'm listening. No, you're waiting for me to stop talking so you can do it your way. That is also a form of listening, not one I charge for. Luis turned the pad toward Ruth. The list was longer than she wanted. Plumbing pressure test, water heater service, septic inspection, electrical inspection, roof repair, gutter replacement, tree work, gravel, fire extinguishers, emergency lighting, smoke alarms, cleaning, pest control. That was before picnic tables, reservations, or guests. How much? Ruth asked. I don't know yet. Roughly, Luis named a range. Walter let out a low whistle. It was not ruinous, but it was more than a gesture. Paying it would mean withdrawing money they had saved for the house, medical expenses, and whatever years still waited beyond the current one. Labor included? Ruth asked. My labor, part-time. Some work needs other people. When could you start? Luis did not answer. Walter rubbed the rust from his palms with a paper towel. You're busy. I'm always busy. You built a good business. I built a business that says yes too often. Ruth looked at him more closely. The gray beneath his eyes was not only age. What aren't you saying? Luis rolled his coffee cup between his hands. I won't come back to keep Walter from falling off ladders, he said. I did enough of that when he was 68. I never fell off a ladder, Walter said. You fell with one. The ground was soft. Luis ignored him. If I do this, we make a fixed list. I'm responsible for the repairs on it. Walter does not start a job because he thinks I'm late. He does not climb. He does not lift anything I mark for 2 people, and you pay invoices when they're due. No trading campsites, no telling me we're family, no promises to catch up after Labor Day. Walter looked stung. Ruth knew why. Years earlier, when cash flow tightened in winter, Luis had sometimes waited. He had never complained. Walter had converted that silence into permission. Did we leave you waiting? She asked. Luis's eyes stayed on the cup. Sometimes. How long? Mrs. Mercer, how long? Once, 6 weeks. Walter's face reddened. You should have said something. I had. The office went quiet. Ruth saw an old version of Pine Hollow she had preferred not to examine. Herself paying the electric company first because it could shut off power. Walter promising Luis they would make things right. Both of them assuming loyalty could absorb the delay. I'm sorry, she said. Luis looked up. So am I, Walter said, the words rougher. Luis nodded once. Ruth pulled the yellow pad closer. Fixed list. Real invoices. No ladders for Walter. Ruth, no ladders for me either. That was already understood, Louise said. And before anyone begins, you give us a written estimate. We decide from the numbers. Louise extended his hand. Ruth offered her left one. He shook it. On the drive back to the farmhouse, Walter was silent. Ruth thought he was brooding over the ladder rule until he said, 6 weeks. I know. I remembered too. So did I. They passed Evelyn's empty campsite, hidden in the lower loop beyond the damaged road. At the gate, a white sedan was parked on the shoulder. For one sharp second, Ruth thought the real estate agent had returned. Then the driver's door opened, and Evelyn Price stepped out holding another cream envelope. She looked smaller than in the photograph, and much more alone. I hoped you might be here, she said. Ruth climbed out of the van. Behind her, Walter opened the gate wider. Evelyn stood beside the sedan, as if unsure whether she had permission to cross the open gate. Her hair, once red, was cut close around a narrow face. She wore a green raincoat despite the clear sky, and held the envelope with both hands. Ruth went to her. I found your note. I realized I didn't put my number on it. Evelyn lifted the second envelope. Arthur always addressed things. I apparently believed envelopes knew where we lived. Ruth hugged her. Evelyn stiffened in surprise, then folded against her with a small sound that was neither a laugh nor a sob. Ruth's wrist protested between them, but she did not pull away. When they separated, Evelyn wiped beneath one eye with the heel of her hand. You look exactly the same, she said. That is grief affecting your vision. Evelyn smiled. Walter doesn't. Thank you, Walter called. Louis busied himself closing the van's rear doors, though Ruth saw him glance away to give Evelyn privacy. Evelyn looked through the gate. It was open. We were inspecting things. So, you are reopening? Walter said. We don't know. Ruth said, possibly. They looked at each other. Evelyn laughed, and the laugh sounded rusty from disuse. Some things are exactly the same. Ruth introduced Louise, who remembered the Prices and Arthur's habit of reporting every dripping faucet as if it threatened the county. Evelyn touched Louise's arm when he told her he was sorry about Arthur. He liked you, she said. He didn't like many competent people, made him feel competitive. That explains Walter, Louise said. Careful, Walter told him. You haven't submitted your bill. I'm adding that. Evelyn followed them to the farmhouse for coffee. She had moved from Greensboro to a smaller condominium outside Asheville after Arthur died. The house had sold quickly, which everyone had called lucky. She said the word with a twist. 43 years of drawers, she said, sitting at Ruth's kitchen table. Do you know how many batteries 2 people can own? Walter nodded solemnly. They multiply in darkness. I found 17 flashlights and not one working bulb. Arthur kept every key he'd ever touched. I threw away keys to cars from 1986. Ruth set down a plate of crackers and cheese. You sold because of the upkeep? My sister kept saying it was too much house for one person. Evelyn looked into her coffee. She wasn't wrong. That made it more irritating. Where is your trailer? Walter asked. In storage near Marion. You kept it? I tried to sell it. 3 men offered me half what it was worth and called me ma'am so many times I wanted to run them over with it. Ruth liked her more than she remembered. Evelyn had camped twice after Arthur's death. The first trip lasted 1 night because she could not reverse into the site and would not accept help from a man who kept waving both arms at once. The second lasted 4 days. She parked badly, left it that way, and discovered nothing terrible happened. I don't want to become one of those people who says we all need to move forward, she said. Forward to where? I would rather decide what comes with me. Ruth glanced at Walter. He was staring at the campground estimate list Louise had left on the counter. What made you drive here? She asked. The anniversary. Then I came back today because of the missing number. Evelyn shrugged, and because I worried the note sounded pathetic. It didn't. It was a little pathetic. It sounded lonely. Evelyn met her eyes. Ruth felt the intimacy of the word after it had left her. Loneliness was acceptable in obituaries and songs, less so at a kitchen table in daylight. Yes, Evelyn said. It was. Walter cleared his throat and offered more coffee. Before Evelyn left, Ruth walked her to the sedan. Walter remained inside, giving them either privacy or avoiding the porch steps. My number is in the envelope, Evelyn said. You don't have to call. We'll call. You don't know if you're opening? No. If you do, I don't need the old site. I know the lower road is damaged. How do you know that? I drove past after the storm. Arthur wouldn't turn in. He said seeing it would only make him angry. That sounds like Arthur. He missed this place. Evelyn looked toward the campground road. He missed it before he died. I think he believed there would be more time. Ruth did not offer the usual phrases. She stood beside Evelyn until the woman got into the car, and she kept her hand on the roof while Evelyn started the engine. I'll call, Ruth said. Evelyn nodded without looking up. The second envelope contained Evelyn's address, telephone number, and a photograph of her silver trailer parked at Site 23. Ruth put it with the first note in the kitchen cabinet, between the ledger and a stack of takeout menus. On Monday, the carpenter Denise hired arrived at 8 in the morning. His name was Calvin. He was older than Mark, and he had been given instructions detailed enough to include the width of the porch rail. Ruth watched him remove the loose board. How much is my daughter paying you? She asked. Calvin glanced toward his truck, perhaps considering escape. She said not to discuss the bill. Then, I will assume it is outrageous. She also said you'd say that. Did she give you responses? She said to tell you the board was rotten. Ruth examined the darkened wood. It is slightly discolored. Calvin pushed a screwdriver through it. Show off, Ruth said. Walter laughed from the doorway, and then winced, one hand moving to his bruised ribs. The motion did not escape Calvin's notice. Nothing escaped anyone's notice anymore. Luis returned that afternoon with the written estimate. The septic service and electrical inspection were listed separately because other contractors would perform them. Even at the lower end, reopening the upper loop would consume more than a third of the Mercer's accessible savings. Walter read every line twice. No, he said. Ruth sat across from him at the kitchen table. No, to which part? All of it. Luis's prices are fair. I know they're fair. Then what? We can't put this much into a campground that might not earn it back. Not in one season, maybe not in 3. We could run the numbers. I have run them. Walter pulled a sheet from beneath the estimate. In his careful block printing, he had calculated 12 sites at several nightly rates, then subtracted utilities, insurance, taxes, supplies, payment fees, and Luis's part-time labor. He had estimated occupancy at 30, 50, and 70%. At 30%, the campground lost money. At 50, they could cover operating costs but not recover the repair expense. At 70, they made enough for Ruth to imagine breathing comfortably, though not enough to justify Walter risking anything more than his pride. You did this last night? She asked. I couldn't sleep. You could have woken me. You need rest. The phrase irritated her. Then she saw the eraser marks across the page and the small tremor in his handwriting. He had not rejected the idea. He had tried to save it while she slept. Ruth traced the 50% column with her left forefinger. Her wrist had begun to ache less, though the bruising remained. We don't need to earn the repair cost back immediately, she said. We might need that money. For what? You know for what. No. Say it. The roof on this house. Another vehicle. Your eyes, my knees. Care. If one of us needs it. The last word settled heavily. Walter looked toward the window, where Calvin was fitting a new board into the porch. Denise thinks we are one accident away from disaster. Denise thinks being prepared can prevent grief. She may be partly right. Ruth sat back. There were days when Walter's caution felt like wisdom, and days when it felt like fear wearing his clothes. She suspected he could say the same of her courage. We closed Pine Hollow to protect what we had left, she said. What exactly have we done with what we protected? We lived. We waited. For what? That's what frightens me. Walter's jaw tightened. You think opening 12 campsites fixes that? No. I think it gives us work we chose. We could choose something easier? Such as? He did not answer. Through the open kitchen window came the scrape of Calvin's saw and the low murmur of a radio. Ruth remembered summer mornings when the campground woke in layers. Zippers, screen doors, coffee spoons, someone coughing near the bathhouse. She did not miss every part. She missed being necessary to a day that had not happened yet. Walter tapped the estimate. We have to count Luis's labor every season, not just repairs. Yes. And we can't assume 70% occupancy because Evelyn wants one site. Yes. You hate reservation software. I hate software that believes it knows what I intended. That is all software. Then it's personal. He tried not to smile. Ruth pulled the ledger from the cabinet. We had repeat guests. Some may come back, some are dead. Walter, it's been 3 years. Then some will be delighted to hear from us. We don't have current numbers. We have names. You want to hunt down 47 former campers? No, 12. That is not how reservations work, I remember. He rubbed his ribs. And if you get tired, I will stop. You don't stop. Then someone will tell me to. Who? Everyone, apparently. The carpenter knocked on the open back door. Porch is safe. Denise had texted him another instruction, Calvin explained. He was to photograph the completed repair and send it directly to her. Ruth stood on the new board while he took the picture. Smile, he said. I don't want to encourage her. He sent it anyway. After Calvin left, Mark's truck came up the driveway. He stepped out carrying a red metal toolbox. Ruth had not invited him, and the set of his shoulders suggested he knew it. I came to fix the downspout, he said. Did your sister send you? No. Did your father? No. Walter remained at the screen door. Mark looked from one parent to the other. Can I just fix one thing without a trial? Ruth moved aside. He set up a short ladder and repaired the loose bracket in 15 minutes. Walter held the ladder, despite Mark saying he did not need to. Ruth sat on the porch with her brace in her lap and watched both men avoid conversation. When Mark finished, he noticed Luis's van tracks leading toward the campground. Who's been back there? Luis, Walter said. Mark climbed down slowly. Luis Mendoza? He inspected the upper loop. For what? Ruth waited. Walter looked at her before answering. It was a small thing, but she saw Mark see it. We're considering reopening 12 sites, Walter said. Mark laughed once. No one joined him. His face changed. You're serious? We're considering it, Ruth said. With what money? Ours? Mark stared at her, and for the first time she saw more than concern or impatience. She saw panic. You can't do that, he said. Ruth rose from the porch chair. There were several questions she might have asked. Why not? According to whom? What had he expected that money to become? Instead, she looked at the red toolbox, the repaired downspout, and her son's suddenly bloodless face. How much trouble are you in, Mark? She asked. Mark glanced toward the open kitchen window. Can we not do this out here? We can do it wherever the answer is shortest. He picked up the toolbox and carried it inside. Walter followed, leaving damp footprints from the grass. Ruth came last and closed the door. Mark set the toolbox beside the refrigerator. I'm not in trouble. Ruth waited. The business has had a bad stretch. How bad? We lost the Henderson renovation. You told us you didn't want that job. I didn't want it after they gave it to somebody else. Walter sat at the table. How much did you count on? Dad, how much? Mark rubbed both hands over his face. Sawdust clung to one temple. Enough to carry payroll through spring. You have employees? Ruth asked. Too regular. More when I need them, and you can't pay them? I have paid them. By not paying whom? He looked at her then. Ruth's anger cooled into something heavier. Mark. Suppliers. The equipment line. Myself. How far behind? I'm managing it. That is not a number. About 42. 100? Walter asked. Mark gave him a look. 1,000, Ruth said. The refrigerator hummed. On the counter, the written estimate for Pine Hollow lay beneath Walter's calculations. Mark saw Ruth looking at it and misunderstood her silence. I wasn't asking you to give me anything, he said. You brought a woman to sell our home. You'd have plenty after the sale, more than enough. You could buy into a good place, have meals, transportation, somebody around if something happened. The campground land is worth more as one parcel than it'll ever make in site fees. And where do you enter that plan? I don't. Try again. His mouth flattened. Eventually, whatever is left comes to Denise and me. Eventually? I'm being honest. No, you are speaking plainly because we caught up to the truth. Walter's voice was low. Does Natalie know? Mark turned away. Natalie was his wife of 21 years. She managed a dental office, paid bills early, and believed Mark's worst financial habit was buying tools in duplicate. Does she? Walter asked again. She knows work is slow. That isn't what he asked, Ruth said. Mark dragged out a chair and sat. I was going to tell her when I had a solution. A solution involving our property, Ruth said. I thought an appraisal would give us information. You thought a sale would give you hope. What is so terrible about that? You're sitting on land you don't use. You can barely maintain the house. Mom fell on the porch. Dad can't feel half his hand. 2 fingers, Walter said. 2 fingers now. Walter flinched. Mark leaned forward. I'm not wishing anything on you. I want you safe. I also don't understand burning $30,000 to prove you can still run a campground. Ruth laid her left hand over the estimate. That isn't why. Then why? She could have told him about Evelyn's note, about the empty rooms and the locked gate, and the difference between help and removal. In Mark's present fear, each reason would sound decorative beside $42,000. Because it is ours to decide, she said. He pushed back from the table. Fine, sit down. I have work. You just told us you don't. The cruelty of it struck all 3 of them. Mark stared at her. I'm sorry, Ruth said. He picked up the toolbox. No, you're not. I am sorry I said it that way. That's not the same thing. No. He moved toward the door. Walter stood. We can look at your numbers. Mark stopped but did not turn. We can look, Walter repeated. That isn't a promise to pay anything. I didn't ask you to pay. You asked us to sell, Ruth said. I won't ask again. Mark opened the door. Tell Natalie, Walter said. Mark stepped onto the porch. You don't get to give me marriage advice. Walter's expression barely changed, but the words found their target. Mark left without his coffee, without hugging either of them, and with the repaired downspout rattling briefly as his truck passed. Ruth remained at the table. Her wrist had begun to ache inside the brace. Did you know? She asked. Not the amount? What did you know? He said things were tight. When? A few months ago. And you didn't tell me? It was his business. He made it our property. He hadn't then. Ruth pulled open the brace straps and rubbed the swollen place below her thumb. You taught him to leave doors open. Walter took the accusation without defending himself. That made it worse. I may have, he said. They ate dinner late and badly. Walter burned one side of 2 grilled cheese sandwiches and left the other side pale. Ruth took the burned one because he always pretended to prefer it. Neither spoke about the estimate until the dishes were dry. Walter brought his calculations into the living room and placed them on the coffee table. If we don't reopen, it doesn't mean we're giving Mark money. I know. If we do reopen, it doesn't mean we're punishing him. I know that too. Do you? Ruth looked at him. Walter sat in his recliner, heating pad across his ribs. You're angry enough to reopen the lower loop with your teeth. I suggested 12 sites before we knew about Mark. You suggested 12 sites before we knew what they cost. She could not argue with that. He leaned forward. The money is not only yours, I know, and the decision is not only mine. That sounds suspiciously like a useful conversation. I have them sometimes. Ruth opened Luis's estimate. What do you want? Walter studied his hands. This time she let him. I want to hear the gate bell again, he said at last. Not the desk bell. The one that rings when a vehicle drives in. The hose pulls the clapper. I know how it works. I'm demonstrating memory. I want to hear somebody complain that Site 6 isn't level when Site 6 has never been level. I want to turn off the office lights because the day is finished, not because there's no reason to have them on. He sat back. I don't want to lose what we need later because I miss being 50. You were never 50 at Pine Hollow. You went from 48 directly to 63. Those were difficult summers. She smiled. Walter tapped the lower number on the estimate. We set a limit. If inspections push it above that, we stop. We open only the upper loop. We pay Luis. We hire for anything we cannot safely do. And after one season, we look at what it truly cost us. Ruth held out her left hand. He took it. The next morning, they called Luis before either could improve the decision into something safer. Work began with noise. The septic truck arrived first and woke every dog within a mile. The electrician spent half a day opening power pedestals and used the phrase not ideal, so often that Ruth began to hate it. Luis removed the broken supply lines, serviced the water heater, and found a nest of acorns inside an exhaust vent. Walter obeyed the no-ladder rule for 11 days. On the 12th, Ruth found him standing on the second rung of a stepladder beneath the office gutter. She parked the utility cart below him. Should I call Luis or Denise? I dropped a screw. Then it belongs to the earth. It's stainless steel. I will notify the geological survey. He climbed down muttering. His face was red, not from exertion, but humiliation. Ruth understood that asking for help was easier in theory, where no one had to stand on the ground while another man fixed his gutter. She took Walter's hand and placed the recovered screw in his palm. "Luis needs the hinge repaired on the supply closet," she said. Walter looked at her. "You can do it sitting down. I am not an invalid. No. You are a man who can repair a hinge sitting down." He closed his fingers around the screw. "There is a difference. I know." He went to the supply closet. Ruth cleaned the office with her brace sealed inside a rubber glove. Mouse droppings filled 2 dustpans. Damp had ruined a carton of brochures and curled the campground map into a tube. She threw out the old sunscreen but saved the desk bell after Walter made it ring properly. The reservation computer did not survive 3 years of moisture. It produced a grinding sound and a blue screen, then went black. "Good," Ruth said. Walter stood behind her. "Good?" It died knowing how I felt about it. They bought a modest laptop and a reservation program recommended by Luis. Ruth disliked both instantly. She created Site 12 twice, deleted Site 4, and accidentally blocked the entire month of June. Walter watched from a safe distance. "You could help," she said. "I could make tea. That would help." Evelyn came on a Thursday while Luis was replacing the office gutter. Her silver trailer followed the white sedan, driven by a tow operator who backed it into Site 3 with such perfection that Evelyn looked offended. "I could have done that," she said. "Then why didn't you?" Ruth asked. "I wanted to arrive speaking to myself." The campground was not open. The bathhouse still had no hot water, half the power pedestals were tagged, and the office counter smelled of bleach. Evelyn knew all of this. She had called the evening before and asked whether they needed someone to test the site. "You cannot stay in a construction area," Walter told her. "I have water in the tank, propane, and a toilet. No electrical hookup. I own an extension cord." Luis looked down from the gutter. "Not one you're plugging in here." Evelyn put both hands on her hips. "Does everyone at this campground have rules?" "Yes," Ruth said. "Most of them were created because of people like you." They let her stay one night. By morning, she had made coffee on her propane stove, swept the office porch, and written 3 pages of notes about Site 3. The gravel pad needed another load at the back. A branch scraped the trailer roof. The water connection was stiff. At the bottom, she had written, "Slept 6 hours. First time since November." Ruth found her sitting behind the office counter, looking at the new laptop. "I used to manage appointments for 4 salesmen," Evelyn said, "before Arthur and I retired. That sounds exhausting." It was. I was very good at it. Ruth set the reservation ledger beside her. "This is the system I understand." Evelyn opened it with care. "And the laptop?" "The laptop and I have agreed to avoid direct contact. You need both." "So?" "I have been told." Evelyn looked from the ledger to the blank reservation screen. "If you're going to open, who will answer calls when you're cleaning, or Walter is arguing with a pipe?" "Walter can answer." From outside came Walter's voice. "Luis, that slope is wrong." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Ruth pulled over the second chair. "How long do you intend to test that campsite?" "As long as it needs testing." "At the nightly rate?" Evelyn's confidence flickered. "I couldn't afford the whole season at the nightly rate. I didn't ask whether you could." Ruth turned the laptop toward her. "Show me," she said, "how to put a person in Site 3 without deleting June." Evelyn clicked on the calendar. "Site 3, she said. "Arrival today. Departure whenever I become irritating. That field does not accept eternity. Put in a month." Ruth looked at her. "A week," Evelyn said. "Put in a month." Evelyn's fingers stopped over the keys. "I told you I can't pay the nightly rate for a month. You'll answer the telephone when you're here. You'll manage this machine. You'll keep the paper ledger current because I don't trust anything that cannot survive a thunderstorm. That is work. Yes. For a campsite. For a reduced seasonal rate. We will decide what is fair before you do another thing." Evelyn stared at the screen. "You're not offering me charity." "No. I am trying to avoid learning software." "That part I believe." They settled on an amount that covered the site's utilities and part of the seasonal rate, with Evelyn's hours recorded and paid as work rather than traded through some fuzzy arrangement likely to leave both women resentful. Luis insisted on that clarity after overhearing them. "Everybody writes down what they do," he said from the office doorway. Evelyn saluted him with a pen. Ruth did not love being corrected inside her own campground. She loved even less how often the correction was useful. Evelyn entered herself into Site 3, restored the missing month of June, and created a confirmation email. When the office printer produced one clean page, she held it up. Your first reservation. We're not open. I won't tell the printer. The page read, Pine Hollow Campground, across the top, in plain black letters. Ruth ran her left thumb along the edge. The name looked different after 3 years of appearing only on bills. Walter came in carrying the repaired supply closet hinge. What's that? Income? Evelyn said. He took the page. At the seasonal rate, it's barely income. You've been talking to Luis, Ruth said. I invented talking to Luis. They pinned the confirmation to the bulletin board beneath the strand of silver tinsel. It was ceremonial and slightly foolish. Ruth left it there. The old ledger supplied 12 names, though finding the people attached to them required Evelyn's laptop patience and Ruth's memory. 2 telephone numbers belonged to strangers. One man had moved to Arizona and said he no longer camped because his back objected to nature. A woman named Patty cried when Ruth identified herself, then explained that her husband had died 2 years earlier and hung up before Ruth could find the proper words. At the 5th call, someone answered, If this is about my car warranty, the car died first. Joe Palmer? Depends who wants her. This is Ruth Mercer from Pine Hollow. Silence. Then Joe said, Well, I'll be damned. She had sold the 5th-wheel trailer after her divorce, but still owned a small camper van. She asked about Site 14, complained when Ruth explained the lower loop would remain closed, then said she would take any site with enough distance from the bathhouse door. You opening for real? Joe asked. For 12 sites. When? Ruth looked through the office window. Luis was measuring the gutter. Walter stood below him, offering advice no one had requested. The upper road had been graded, but half the sites still needed work. Soon. That is not a date. It is the date we currently have. Joe arrived that Saturday wearing work boots, cropped white hair, and a red t-shirt that said, Resistance is futile if ohms are low. Ruth did not understand the joke, but laughed because Joe clearly expected it. Joe carried a toolbox into the office before bringing in her overnight bag. I heard you had electrical trouble, she said. We had an inspection. By whom? Ruth gave her the electrician's name. Joe nodded. He's competent. You sound disappointed. I enjoy finding fools. Makes the day move. The inspection had identified 3 pedestals requiring new breakers and 1 circuit in the old game room that needed to be disconnected. Luis had arranged the repairs, but the electrician could not return for 9 days. Joe examined the report, then asked permission to look. Walter answered too quickly. Of course. Ruth caught his sleeve. As a camper or an electrician? Joe looked amused. Licensed electrician, retired from full-time work. Still take jobs when I like the people. And do you like us? No idea. I just got here. They agreed on an hourly rate. Joe spent the afternoon testing outlets while Walter followed at a distance Luis would have considered insufficient. At pedestal 7, she removed the cover and pointed to blackening along a wire. Heat damage, she said. Walter crouched beside her. That wasn't in the report. He tested the breaker. Didn't pull this connection? You can replace it? I can. We have wire in the shed. Joe gave him a patient look. How old? Wire doesn't spoil. Neither does mustard, according to Ruth. We're buying new. At supper, the 5 of them ate fried chicken around the long picnic table outside the office. Pine Hollow remained cluttered with stacked lumber and orange safety cones, but Joe had power running safely to 5 sites. Evelyn had placed a vase of wild violets beside the napkins. Luis arrived late with gravel dust in his beard. Walter lifted a paper cup. To unpaid overtime. Luis did not lift his. No. Walter lowered the cup. Right. To written invoices, Ruth said. They drank to that. Joe ate 1 chicken leg and half another before saying, My former husband hated when I fixed things. No one had asked. She wiped her fingers on a napkin. He liked telling people I was handy. Didn't like watching me no more than he did. Evelyn passed her the potatoes. Arthur liked competent women as long as they were fictional. Walter likes them when they agree with him, Ruth said. I like Ruth, Walter replied. That disproves your theory, Joe pointed a fork at him. You're trainable. Walter looked offended. Luis laughed hard enough to cough. Ruth watched them under the string of temporary work lights. Nothing about the meal resembled the reopening she had imagined. There were no campers yet, no painted sign, no guarantee that the money leaving their account would return. Yet the campground no longer felt empty. It felt unfinished, which was different. Jo stayed 2 nights. She repaired the damaged pedestal, disconnected the game room circuit, and refused Walter's suggestion to reduce her bill because she had eaten 2 dinners. My ex did that, she said. Did what? Turn my work into help so he didn't have to value it. Walter opened his mouth, then closed it. He paid her invoice in full. The final inspections and repairs brought their total close to the limit Walter and Ruth had set, but not over it. The bathhouse water ran clear and hot. 10 power pedestals passed. 2 sites would remain without hookups. Luis installed emergency lights and mounted new extinguishers. A pest control company removed 2 wasp nests and told Ruth the mice had considered the office a long-term lease. The campground telephone number was reconnected. It rang while Evelyn was hanging curtains. All 3 women froze. "Answer it," Ruth said. "You answer it," Evelyn replied. "You are employed. You're the owner." The phone rang a 3rd time. Ruth picked up. "Pine Hollow Campground." Her voice sounded too formal. A man asked whether they had pull-through sites for a 40-foot motorhome. "No," Ruth said. "Pool? No. Cable? No. What do you have?" Ruth looked through the window at Walter and Luis arguing over the angle of a site marker. Joe's camper van sat beneath the pines. Evelyn's violets had wilted on the counter. "Quiet," she said. "Hot showers. 12 sites far enough apart that you won't hear your neighbor breathe." The man booked 2 nights. Evelyn entered the reservation before Ruth hung up. Word traveled through former campers faster than any advertisement they could have purchased. Joe posted a photograph of the office bell on a camping group. Evelyn called 3 people from the old ledger. Within a week, opening weekend had 7 bookings. They could not delay choosing a date. Walter circled the last Friday in April on the wall calendar. Ruth called Denise that evening. She intended to tell her. She truly did. Denise answered from her car, tired and distracted. "Is everything okay?" "Yes." "Did Dad see the hand specialist?" "Tuesday." "And your wrist?" "Improving. Are you wearing the brace?" Ruth looked at it on the table. "Yes." Walter glanced over his newspaper. Denise exhaled. "Good. I'm sorry. Long day." Ruth heard a turn signal clicking. She imagined her daughter driving home in darkness, waiting for disaster while handling other people's all day. "We're making some changes," Ruth said. "To the house, to how we manage things." "That's good. We have help now." "From Luis?" Ruth sat straighter. "How do you know about Luis?" Mark saw his van. Mark is observant when property is involved. "Mom, please don't start." Ruth could feel the conversation narrowing. If she said campground, Denise would hear fall, wet slippers, numb fingers, $42,000. She would not hear the repaired pedestals or Evelyn answering the phone. "Call me when you get home," Ruth said instead. "I will." Denise did not. Ruth did not call back. The night before opening, rain came hard from the west. Water rushed through the new upper loop drainage ditch exactly where Luis said it would. The office roof remained dry. Ruth and Walter stood beneath the porch awning with Evelyn and watched the gravel darken. "Arthur would have inspected every ditch with a flashlight," Evelyn said. "Walter already did," Ruth replied. "I was checking flow," he said. "You were wearing pajamas. Water doesn't keep office hours." By morning, the clouds had lifted. The campground smelled of wet pine, bleach, and fresh gravel. Luis lit a test fire in the ring beside the office. Evelyn placed reservation packets in alphabetical order. Walter mounted the painted board above the gate, while Ruth stood in the road and told him the left side was low. "It is level," he said. "It appears level to a man holding it. You want to hold it? I want it higher." They adjusted it twice. At 10 minutes before opening, Walter pulled the chain from around the post. A rusted link had twisted beneath the hinge and would not come free. "I'll get oil," Luis said. Walter went to the utility cart and returned with bolt cutters. "No," Ruth said. "I'm cutting one link." "Your hand." "My hand is fine. Your hand has an appointment Tuesday." He braced the cutters against his thigh. "Don't you dare. It's my better leg." Behind them, tires slowed on the gravel. Denise's silver SUV stopped beside the "closed for repairs" sign they had not yet removed. She got out, leaving the driver's door open. Her gaze moved from the bolt cutters to the new sign, the smoke rising behind the gate, and Evelyn standing in the office doorway with a stack of reservation packets. "Mom," she called, "what have you done?" Walter squeezed. The rusted link broke with a crack. The chain dropped at Ruth's feet. She bent, picked it up with her healed hand, and said, "We reopened the campground." Denise stared at the broken chain in Ruth's hand. "You reopened it today?" "In 10 minutes," Evelyn called from the office. "Technically." Ruth introduced her, which was absurd under the circumstances. Denise nodded without absorbing the name. "How long has this been going on?" 6 weeks, Ruth said. "You have been repairing a campground for 6 weeks?" "Not continuously." "That is your answer?" "What would improve it?" "The truth." Ruth felt the word in the soft place it deserved to strike. Walter set down the bolt cutters. "We should have told you sooner," Denise looked at him. "You saw a hand specialist 3 days ago. You told me you were taking it easy." "I have been." "You were using bolt cutters. It was one link. You always reduce things to the smallest part when you know the whole thing is wrong." Walter glanced toward Ruth, perhaps recognizing the charge. A bell rang behind them. The sound came from the hose stretched across the entrance road. The right front tire of a blue pickup compressed it, pulling the clapper against the old brass bell mounted beside the office. One clear clang moved through Pine Hollow. Walter turned before anyone else. The pickup continued through the open gate, towing a white travel trailer. A gray-haired man leaned out the window. "You folks open, or is this a family emergency?" "Both," Evelyn said. Ruth lifted the broken chain out of the road. "Come in." Denise stepped aside as the trailer passed. Her face had gone pale with anger. "We are not finished," she said. "No," Ruth replied, "but we have guests. That doesn't make this safe. Luis made it safe. Luis made it operational. Those are not the same thing. Nothing is entirely safe. Here we go." "What does that mean?" "It means you've been waiting 6 weeks to say that." Another vehicle appeared at the top of the road. Evelyn hurried from the office with a reservation packet. "Ruth, the Whitakers are early. Site 7 still has cones across the entrance." "I'll move them," Walter said. Luis caught the back of his jacket. "You'll show them where to go. I'll move the cones." Walter frowned but obeyed. Denise watched the exchange. "He's paid," Ruth said. "What?" "Luis? He's managing repairs and maintenance. Evelyn handles reservations. We have passed the inspections we needed. The upper bathhouse is open. 10 sites have electric service. We have an emergency plan. You have an emergency plan." "Yes. Where?" "In the office." "Who has it?" "Everyone working here." "Does it include your medical information?" "Dad's medication." "Who calls me?" Ruth tightened her grip on the chain. "It includes whom we chose to call." Denise flinched as if Ruth had swung it. That was not what Ruth had intended, though intention had become a weak defense in this family. The Whitakers' pickup idled beside them. The driver lowered his window. "Mrs. Mercer?" Ruth recognized his voice from the telephone. "Yes." "Which way to 7? "Follow Luis. He's moving the cones." The man's wife leaned across the cab. "We're so glad you're open." Ruth thanked her. She felt Denise standing beside her as the truck passed, felt every cheerful word become evidence of betrayal. Denise went to her SUV. "Are you leaving?" Ruth asked. "I have no idea what I'm doing. Stay." The words surprised them both. Denise rested one hand on the open car door. "You didn't want me here. I didn't want you to stop us." "Same thing?" "No. It has felt the same for 6 weeks." Ruth could not deny it. "We open at noon," she said. "Stay until supper. See what we've done. And then tell me everything wrong with it." Denise gave a short laugh without humor. "You know exactly how to invite me. It is your favorite activity. Maybe because you only call when something is wrong." The next trailer pulled in before Ruth could answer. Denise shut her car door, moved the SUV onto the grass beside the equipment shed, and stayed. The first 3 arrivals went smoothly. Evelyn checked names against the laptop and marked them in the paper ledger. Ruth handed out campground maps, circling the bathhouse and the common fire ring. Walter rode ahead in the utility cart, while Luis guided trailers into the sites. Denise stood near the office counter with her arms folded. Evelyn finally handed her a stack of welcome sheets. "Could you fold these?" Denise looked at the papers. "If you're going to supervise," Evelyn said, "you need a station." Ruth waited for offense. Instead, Denise sat on the stool and began folding with perfect hard creases. At 2:15, a motorhome arrived without a reservation. The driver had seen Joe's photograph online and assumed Pine Hollow had full hookups. "We don't," Ruth said. "I drove 40 miles. I'm sorry." "You got a dump station?" Yes, but not at the sites. What about cable? No. He stared at her. What kind of campground is this? The kind described on the website you did not read. Behind Ruth, Denise made a choking sound. The man eventually took Site 9 for one night. Evelyn entered him into the laptop while Ruth wrote his name in the ledger. You enjoyed that, Denise said after he left. More than I should have. I remember you doing the same thing when I was 28. Ruth looked at her. You'd smile at rude guests, Denise said. The nicer you got, the closer they were to being thrown out. That is not true. You once called a man sir 11 times in 30 seconds. He had earned formality. At 4, Denise inspected the emergency plan. She found 3 missing medication doses, an outdated hospital number, and no clear instructions for Walter's intermittent hand numbness. This is not an emergency plan, she said. It's a list of telephone numbers and a drawing of the gate. The ambulance needs to know which gate, Walter said. The ambulance also needs to know that you take a blood thinner. I put heart medicine. Which one? How much? Walter took the paper. I can add it. Denise pulled a pen from her purse. Sit down. Ruth expected him to resist. He sat. Denise rewrote the medical section with both of them, asking questions and recording exact answers. She added the campground address to every page, marked the shut-off locations, and wrote Luis's responsibilities beside his name. When she finished, she placed one copy near the office telephone, one in the bathhouse cabinet, and one in the farmhouse. There, she said. Now it's a plan. Ruth read it. It's better. Denise looked at her, suspicious. It is, Ruth said. You could have asked me to help. You might have tried to stop us. I might have. You'll never know. The sky darkened before supper. A low bank of clouds gathered over the ridge, blue-black beneath the edges. Luis checked the drainage ditch. Walter checked behind him. Evelyn moved the welcome table inside. Guests pulled awnings in and secured chairs. Denise looked at her phone. Storm warning? We had one last night, Walter said. This one has stronger wind. Ruth watched a pine bend above Site 5. Ask everyone to come to the office if they're uncomfortable, she said. The office has windows on 3 sides, Denise replied. The bathhouse is masonry, Luis said. Interior hall, no windows. Denise nodded. Use that. They went site to site. Most guests stayed in their trailers. The Whitakers came to the bathhouse carrying raincoats and a deck of cards. The unreserved motorhome driver complained that the weather alert had not been mentioned at check-in. Ruth almost called him Sir. Rain began in hard, slanted lines. The new office gutter held. Water poured into the drainage channel and moved downhill without crossing the upper road. Walter stood beneath the porch awning, watching it with the satisfaction of a man whose personal advice had been taken by gravity. Then a drop struck Ruth's shoulder. She looked up. Water darkened the ceiling near the rear office wall, several feet from the repaired section. Another drop fell onto the reservation counter. Luis swore softly and grabbed a bucket. The roof was fixed, Denise said. That corner was fixed, Luis replied. Water began dripping in 2 places. Evelyn covered the laptop with a plastic tablecloth. Ruth moved the ledger. Denise found towels. For 20 minutes, everyone worked without arguing. The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving the office smelling of wet wood and damp paper. No one was hurt. The road remained open. The guests returned to their sites. But the leak had spread across the ceiling in a shape that resembled an accusation. Denise stood beneath it, holding a full bucket. You spent how much? She asked. Ruth told her. Denise closed her eyes. We set a limit, Ruth said. We stayed within it. You don't know what this roof will cost. No. You don't know how many more things you'll find. No. And you opened anyway. Yes. Denise put the bucket down too hard. Water slapped over the rim. Walter's voice was tired. That is generally how opening works. Denise turned on him. You could lose everything trying to keep this. We are not spending everything. Not today. Luis quietly carried the bucket outside. Denise picked up her purse. I can't watch you do this. Ruth wanted to ask her to stay for supper. Pride reached the words first. Then don't? Denise's face closed. She left through the office door. A minute later, her SUV passed over the entrance hose. The bell rang once as she drove away. Walter looked at Ruth. What? She said. You know what. She came here expecting disaster. She came because you didn't tell her. Ruth gathered the wet towels. Would you like to follow her? No? Then help me. I'm not choosing sides. That is what people say when they enjoy both sides choosing them. Walter walked out. Evelyn emerged from behind the counter, holding the damp reservation ledger. Should I go? No. That answer was too fast. I am tired of people leaving whenever I fail to be pleasant. Evelyn set the ledger down. Perhaps some of them leave because you make the door so easy to find. Ruth stared at her. Evelyn's mouth tightened. You can fire me after you apologize to your daughter. Before Ruth could answer, the telephone rang. She snatched it up. Pine Hollow Campground. A woman said she had reserved Site 6 for the following afternoon and wanted to confirm early check-in. Ruth opened the ledger. A different name was already written on Site 6. She turned toward Evelyn, who was pulling the protected laptop from beneath the plastic. On the screen, Site 6 belonged to the caller. In Ruth's handwriting, on paper, it belonged to someone else. Both reservations were prepaid. Evelyn looked at Ruth across the wet counter. Well, she said, at least the roof is no longer the only problem. Ruth covered the receiver with her hand. Who is in the ledger? Evelyn turned it toward herself. Ray and Marlene Cobb, 2 nights, 30 amp. And the caller, Diane Sutter, 3 nights, also 30 amp. How many powered sites are open tomorrow? Evelyn checked the screen. None. Site 11, reserved at noon. 12, no hookup. Ruth looked toward the dark window. Site 12 was level enough for a tent or a self-contained van, not the travel trailer Diane had described when she booked. Mrs. Mercer, Diane said through the receiver. Ruth lifted the phone. I'm here. We have a problem with the reservation. The explanation sounded worse each time Ruth attempted it. Diane had booked online and received a confirmation. The Cobbs had called Ruth directly 4 days earlier, while Evelyn was collecting linens from the bathhouse. Ruth had written them into the ledger and accepted payment over the telephone. She had intended to enter the reservation on the laptop. Intention had not held Site 6. Diane listened without interruption. So, you don't have my site, she said. I have another site without electricity. My husband uses a medical breathing machine at night. Ruth closed her eyes. Then that site will not work. No. We can refund your full payment. I don't need a refund. I need the campsite I reserved. Yes. Evelyn searched for another campground on the laptop, but the storm had filled nearby parks with travelers leaving the higher elevations. One had a tent site. Another had no one answering after hours. Diane's voice became quieter, which was worse than shouting. She and her husband were meeting friends at Pine Hollow. They had planned the trip for 2 months. They had chosen the campground because the website described it as small and personal. I am sorry, Ruth said. You've said that? Yes. Will you call me if something opens? I will. After the call ended, Ruth wrote Diane's number on a bright yellow note and stuck it to the telephone. Her fingers left wet marks on the paper. Evelyn sat opposite her. I should have compared every page of the ledger. I took the reservation. I'm handling reservations. You were cleaning. I should not have been cleaning. Then who should? Evelyn gave her a pointed look. Ruth dropped the pen. This is not the time to teach me the modern economy. It may be exactly the time. Walter appeared in the doorway, rain shining on his shoulders. Teach you what? We double-booked Site 6, Ruth said. He looked from the ledger to the laptop. How? I wrote one down. That is not an explanation. It is the entire explanation. He came behind the counter, studied the site map, and tapped Site 12. We could move the Cobbs there and run power temporarily. Luis, entering behind him with the empty bucket, said, No, I didn't say extension cord. You thought it loudly. We have outdoor cable, not across a wet access lane. Walter tapped Site 10, moved the picnic table, and put the Cobbs beside the pad. Their trailer would fit diagonally. Site 10 is booked, the pad is, there's room beside it. You want 2 parties on one site? For 2 nights. Luis stared at him. We can ask, Walter said. We can, Ruth replied. Tomorrow. No one is moving anything tonight. Walter looked through the window. Rain still dripped from the pines, but the worst had passed. If we shift the table now, we'll know what space we have. Tomorrow, Luis repeated. I'll bring the dolly. It's a picnic table, not a house. It's soaked pine. Wait. Walter walked out before either of them could stop him. Ruth found him at Site 10 with both hands under the end of the table. He lifted, dragged it 6 inches, and let it fall. Walter, it's caught on a root. Luis said, wait, Luis has gone to shut down the bathhouse heater. Then the table will still be here when he returns. Walter bent again. Ruth reached for his shoulder. Stop, I can move a table. His voice carried more than the words. He could fix a hinge. He could guide campers. He could make the desk bell ring. He could not climb, lift, test, wire, patch, or decide without someone evaluating his body first. Ruth understood all of that. Not this one, she said. He pulled anyway. The table lurched free of the root. Walter twisted to avoid the fire ring and made a harsh sound. His hands released. One bench struck the ground, splashing mud across both their legs. Walter remained bent, one palm pressed against his lower back. Ruth's anger vanished. Can you straighten? Give me a minute. Did something snap? No. You don't know? I know. Luis came running from the bathhouse. Between them, they got Walter upright. He could walk, though each step tightened his mouth. At the farmhouse, Ruth helped him change into dry clothes while Luis called the after-hours nurse line, listed in their new emergency plan. Denise had written the number in blue ink. The nurse asked about weakness, numbness, loss of bladder control, severe pain. Walter answered no to each question with growing offense. She advised ice, rest, and urgent evaluation if the symptoms changed. Muscle strain, Walter said when Luis ended the call. You're fortunate, Luis replied. I moved wrong. You didn't wait. Walter's face hardened. I don't work for you. No. I work for you. That's why I need to know whether my job is fixing the campground or following you around so you don't hurt yourself. Ruth sat at the edge of the bed. Luis took a breath. I can't do both. Walter looked away. I'll be back at 7, Luis said. Don't move the table. Very funny. I wasn't joking. After he left, Ruth put a wrapped ice pack against Walter's back and sat beside him. Mud had dried along the hem of her pants. Her hand shook when she removed the brace. You were right, Walter said. I know. You could wait until I'm less defenseless to enjoy it. I'm not enjoying it. That's worse. She pressed the ice pack too hard. He flinched. Sorry. They sat without speaking. At 10, Ruth returned to the campground because Evelyn was alone in the office. Walter insisted he could manage the distance between the bed and bathroom. Ruth left his phone, water, medication, and the emergency plan copy on the nightstand where even Denise would have approved. Evelyn had dried the counter and moved the laptop beneath the good part of the ceiling. 2 buckets caught the remaining drips. How is he? In pain and pretending it is a personality choice. Arthur did that. Did you tolerate it? I was married 43 years. Tolerance occurred. Ruth called Diane with the update that there was still no suitable site. Diane thanked her without warmth. The following afternoon, the Cobbs arrived first. Ruth recognized Marlene Cobb from the ledger, only after seeing the artificial sunflower clipped to her visor. Marlene had camped at Pine Hollow for 11 summers and greeted Ruth by touching the brace. What happened to you? Porch. Those things are vicious. Ray Cobb needed the 30-amp service for the trailer's air conditioner, not medical equipment. Ruth explained the error and asked whether they would consider the unpowered site with a discount. Ray looked toward the humid sky. Marlene sleeps hot. I become violent, Marlene said pleasantly. They kept site 6. Diane and her husband arrived an hour later, towing a compact trailer behind a gray SUV. Diane was younger than Ruth had imagined, perhaps in her late 50s. Her husband sat in the passenger seat with a portable oxygen concentrator between his feet. Ruth met them in the road before they reached the office. I'm so sorry. Diane looked past her at the site markers. You really have nothing? Nothing with safe power. We passed 3 empty sites. 2 are reserved for tonight. 1 has no hookup. You confirmed ours. Yes. We left before dawn. I know. No, you don't. Ruth let the words stand. She offered the refund, 3 nights free on any future date, and the number of a motel Luis had found 20 miles away with trailer parking. Diane accepted the refund and refused everything else. As the SUV turned around, the entrance bell rang. Diane did not wave. Ruth stood in the road until the vehicle disappeared. Behind her, one of the guests called for help with a water connection. The office telephone began ringing. Someone had left a bag of trash outside the bathhouse despite the sign pointing to the dumpster. The campground was open. It did not care whether she felt capable of it. By evening, Walter could walk without holding the furniture. He came to the office in the utility cart, moving stiffly. "You should be in bed," Ruth said. "So should everyone over 75. That seems to be the new theory. Do not start." He saw her face and stopped. Diane came and left. "I'm sorry. It was my mistake. It was our system. I was the system. And that is the problem." Ruth looked at him. Walter sat carefully on the second stool. "You're not the only person allowed to tell the truth badly." Evelyn appeared from the back room, carrying the ledger and a roll of red tape. She placed both on the counter. "No one writes reservations in this anymore," she said. "The laptop is the master. Every telephone booking goes into it before payment. The ledger is printed each morning as backup." Ruth touched the worn cover. "You can write notes about people," Evelyn added. "You appear to need that." "I do." "Then write notes, not dates." Ruth pushed the ledger toward her. "You're in charge of reservations." "Entirely?" "Entirely." Evelyn looked at Walter. "Don't involve me," he said. "I'm forbidden from furniture." They wrote the new procedure on a sheet of paper and taped it beside the phone. After Evelyn left for her trailer and Walter drove back to the house, Ruth remained in the darkened camp store. The only light came from the reservation screen and the emergency fixture above the door. 7 occupied sites glowed between the trees. She could hear low conversation, a trailer door closing, water running in the bathhouse, sounds she had wanted back. She pictured Diane's husband with the machine between his feet, Denise driving away. Walter bent over the picnic table. Louise saying he could not fix the campground and protect them from themselves. Perhaps reopening had not been courage. Perhaps it was vanity with invoices. The telephone rang. Ruth almost let it. Then she answered. Pine Hollow Campground. A woman asked whether they had a site available next Thursday. Ruth opened the laptop, not the ledger. "Yes," she said after checking. "We do." The woman wanted 2 nights, 30-amp service, and a site close to the bathhouse. Ruth selected Site 4 on the screen. "Your name?" "Gloria Benton." Ruth typed it, repeated the dates, entered the telephone number, and clicked the button marked Reserve. A green box appeared. Confirmation sent. She checked the calendar twice before accepting payment. "Anything else I should know?" Ruth asked. "My sister snores." "Will she be in a separate trailer?" "No." "Then that seems primarily your difficulty." Gloria laughed. "I think I'm going to like you." Ruth hung up and wrote in the ledger, Benton Sisters, Site 4. 1 snores. The dates remained only in the computer. The distinction felt both ridiculous and important. At the farmhouse, Walter lay in bed with 2 pillows beneath his knees. He had left the television on low and fallen asleep during a program about rebuilding an engine. Ruth removed his glasses and placed them on the nightstand. The emergency plan copy lay beside his medication. She picked it up. Denise's handwriting was clean even where she had written quickly. Dosage confirmed with bottle. She had added beside one of Walter's prescriptions. Under Ruth's information, she had drawn a line through the old hospital telephone number and written the new one twice. Ruth took her phone into the kitchen. Denise did not answer. "It's me," Ruth said after the beep. "You were right that we should have told you. I didn't because I believed you would try to stop us, but keeping it from you gave you another reason not to trust our judgment. I'm sorry." She almost ended the message. "And the emergency plan is better." Walter strained his back, and we used the nurse number you wrote down. "He is all right. Do not get in the car." That was not a challenge. She stopped, listening to her own breathing. "I asked you to stay and then punished you for being there. I'm sorry for that too." She ended the call before apology became defense. Denise responded the following morning with a text. "I'm glad Dad is okay. Thank you for telling me. Nothing about forgiveness, nothing about the campground." Ruth accepted what was offered. The roof repair cost enough to erase nearly all the space beneath their spending limit. Louise found the leak along a seam, where 2 metal panels met. The repair required a lift rental because he refused to use Walter's extension ladder, a decision Walter called excessive, until Louise showed him photographs of rust around the fasteners. Walter's back improved slowly. For several days, he managed the gate from a folding chair, greeting arrivals and radioing Louise when someone needed help. "I look like a parking attendant," he complained. "You look employed," Ruth said. "I am not being paid. That is why the business may survive." He gave directions well. He remembered which trailers swung wide, which sites required drivers to approach from the upper turn, and which guests needed to be told once rather than assisted into anger. Sitting down did not diminish that knowledge. By the time he could walk the upper loop comfortably, the folding chair had become his station. He kept it beside the office. The campground found a rhythm that did not require either Mercer to be everywhere. Evelyn handled the morning calls and confirmation emails. Luis posted a maintenance board in the office with 3 columns: today, this week, and do not touch until Luis arrives. Walter moved 2 items from the 3rd column during the 1st week. Luis moved them back. Ruth wrote Walter's name beneath the heading as a warning. When the Benton sisters arrived, Gloria identified herself as the non-snoring one. Her sister Bernice replied that no living person could verify that claim because Gloria always fell asleep first. They stayed 4 nights instead of 2. On the 3rd evening, rain drove everyone beneath the office porch. Evelyn brought crackers. Joe, back for another weekend, contributed cheese and a bottle of wine she described as adequate after the 1st glass. The Whitakers heated soup in their trailer and carried out the entire pot. 10 adults balanced bowls on their knees while water ran from the new gutter. "This is foolish," Evelyn said. "You have a whole game room." The old game room occupied the rear half of the office building. It had been locked since the electrical inspection, filled with a broken foosball table, warped board games, and 3 arcade machines that had not worked since people stopped carrying quarters. "The circuit is disconnected," Ruth said. Joe sipped her wine. "The dangerous circuit is disconnected. Is there a safe one?" "There could be." Walter looked toward the locked door. Ruth saw the idea take hold and raised 1 finger. "We are at the limit. We own tables," he said. "We own damaged tables. Luis can fix them." Luis, eating soup beside the steps, said, "Luis can provide an estimate." The game room did not become a project so much as lose its resistance to becoming one. Guests helped carry out boxes. Joe rewired 2 outlets and installed brighter fixtures at her regular rate. Walter repaired the least damaged table while seated at a workbench. Evelyn found second-hand chairs in 6 different styles and insisted the mismatch made them welcoming. Ruth cleaned the old refrigerator until it stopped smelling like unplugged years. They called it the common room because every better name sounded like a restaurant or a church basement. It held a long table, a coffee machine, a sink, and shelves for shared dishes. No one pretended it was beautiful. The floor sloped near the back wall, and 1 ceiling tile remained yellow from an ancient leak. People used it. Seasonal campers left muffins there. Joe organized a jar of spare fuses. Evelyn placed fresh violets on the table and a framed copy of the old campfire photograph on the wall. The first shared supper happened on a Tuesday without planning. Bernice brought beans, Luis had rice, and Walter cooked sausages outside because Ruth did not allow him near the common room stove after he claimed a grease fire could be managed with a cookie sheet. Ruth called Denise once a week. Their conversations remained careful. Denise asked about Walter's back and Ruth's wrist. Ruth answered without editing for effect. She told Denise when the roof leaked again during a light shower, and then told her Luis had found water trapped in the gutter rather than a new roof failure. Denise asked how many sites were occupied. 8 tonight. Are you tired? Yes. Are you going to rest? After supper. A pause followed. Okay, Denise said. Ruth nearly thanked her for not arguing. That would have turned restraint into another accusation. Mark did not call. Walter phoned him twice and received brief answers. Work was improving, Mark said. He had a plan. Natalie still did not know the amount of his debt. Then, it isn't a plan, Ruth said after Walter hung up. He says he's selling equipment. He needs equipment to work. He says some is extra. He came here with duplicate tools for 30 years and suddenly discovers restraint. Walter looked toward the campground road. We could help him with the supplier bill. No, I said could, and I answered. He is our son. He is also a 47-year-old man who tried to sell our home before telling his wife the truth. Walter rubbed 2 fingers against his palm, testing the numbness. The specialist believed a compressed nerve in his wrist was responsible and had prescribed a brace at night, with further tests if it worsened. If we had sold, he said, he might have told himself he saved us. He might still. Neither had spoken to Mark about the campground money again. Denise arrived on a Thursday afternoon without calling. Ruth was in the common room entering supply receipts while Evelyn answered the telephone in the office. Walter sat outside repairing a drawer from cabin 1. Luis and a tree crew were removing a damaged limb near Site 5. Denise came through the side door carrying her purse and the alert expression of someone prepared to discover smoke. Ruth looked up. "Hello?" Denise surveyed the room. This was the game room. It was. You still had that foosball table? It had become structural. Denise noticed the frame photograph, the mismatched chairs, and the whiteboard on the wall. The board listed each occupied site, emergency contact procedures, the weather forecast, and staff responsibilities. Beneath Walter's name, Evelyn had written, "No ladders" in red. Denise walked closer. Who made this? Evelyn and Luis. You update it daily? Evelyn does. I am not permitted to erase anything without a witness. Denise read the maintenance board next. She opened the first aid cabinet and found labeled shelves, current supplies, and a printed inventory. She checked the refrigerator temperature log. Ruth watched her work through all the places where failure might be hiding. "You can ask," Ruth said. "Ask what? Whether I've fallen again?" Denise closed the refrigerator. "Have you?" "No." "Has Dad?" "No." "Any chest pain? Dizziness? More numbness?" "You are widening the category." Denise looked embarrassed. "Sorry. His hand is the same. His back is better. I am tired by 4 most days, so Evelyn closes the office twice a week." "You let her?" "I pay her." "That wasn't what I meant." "I know." Outside, the entrance bell rang. Evelyn greeted the arriving camper over the radio, and Luis answered that he would guide them to Site 8. Walter remained at his workbench. Denise heard all of it. "You have systems," she said. The surprise irritated Ruth, but she let it pass. "We have people." Denise sat at the long table. "Mark said you were spending everything. Mark is frightened about his business. He told me some." "How much is some?" "Enough to ask whether you were giving him money." "We are not." Denise nodded, relieved and then guilty for appearing relieved. Ruth closed the receipt folder. "Have you eaten?" "No." "We're having supper at 6. I didn't come to inspect you. You inspected the refrigerator. I work in a hospital. Temperature logs attract me. Stay anyway." Denise looked toward the whiteboard. "What do you need me to do?" "Nothing. I can update the medication sheets. They're current. I could review the first aid, Denise." Her daughter stopped. Ruth pulled out the chair beside her. "I am asking you to stay for supper," she said. "Not fix supper, not organize it, not improve the emergency plan, just stay." Denise's face shifted in a way Ruth could not immediately read. "I don't know if I remember how," she said. "Neither do I." At 6, they sat beside each other at the long table, while Walter passed a bowl of potato salad, and Evelyn complained that Joe had brought the same allegedly adequate wine. Denise reached for the bowl. No one asked her to hold anything together. Denise ate 2 helpings and refused to discuss anyone's blood pressure. At first, she seemed unable to stop tracking the room. Her eyes followed Walter when he rose for napkins. She noticed Luis lifting the hot sausage pan instead of him. She watched Ruth enter a new reservation into the laptop before writing a note in the ledger. Then Joe told a story about rewiring a beauty salon where every dryer had been connected to the same overloaded circuit, and Denise laughed hard enough to lose interest in the medication sheets. After supper, she carried her own plate to the common room sink. "You don't have to clean," Ruth said. "I'm washing 1 plate. I am protecting the terms of your invitation." Denise turned on the faucet. "You do know how annoying it is when someone treats ordinary help like an attempted takeover?" Ruth leaned against the counter. "I am beginning to." Denise washed the plate and dried it. She did not touch anyone else's. They walked to the farmhouse together. Walter stayed behind to close the office with Evelyn. Fireflies blinked above the ditch, and voices moved quietly between occupied sites. "You look happy," Denise said. "I look sweaty. Both can be true." Ruth waited. Denise rarely approached a subject directly if she cared about it. She built a corridor around it first. "When Dad had his first knee replacement," Denise said, "you asked me to come for 2 weeks. Ruth kept walking. "I remember. I stayed 4 months. The campground was busy. I know. You said the hospital position was still available. The promotion wasn't." Ruth stopped near the gate. Denise looked toward the road. "I didn't tell you that then. You would have felt guilty, and I was already angry enough. You said you didn't want the job. I said that after they gave it to someone else." The echo of Mark's words made Ruth wince. "I believed you," she said. "I wanted you to." "Why?" "Because I chose to stay. I loved you. Dad needed help, and you were doing everything." But once I became the person who handled things, nobody ever invited me to stop. Ruth remembered Denise at 28, carrying campground receipts in one hand and Walter's ice pack in the other. She had praised her daughter to every guest who would listen. Dependable Denise. Practical Denise. The one who never needed asking twice. Praise could build a cage as efficiently as criticism. "I'm sorry," Ruth said. Denise glanced at her. "I'm not asking you to apologize for needing me. What are you asking?" "I don't know. Maybe for you to see that when I make lists, it isn't because I think you're incompetent. It's because I learned that if I didn't make the list, I might discover later that everyone thought I already had." Ruth looked back at the common room windows. Walter was stacking chairs despite being told not to. Luis took the stack from him, and Walter surrendered it after only one remark. "We taught you that love meant watching for what might go wrong," Ruth said. "You also taught me how to make pie crust. You weren't entirely damaging. Your crust is too thick." "There she is." They continued toward the house. At the porch, Ruth touched the new board Calvin had installed. "You can be our daughter. That sounds suspiciously uncomplicated." "We'll be bad at it," Denise smiled. "I can work with that." Summer settled into Pine Hollow, one occupied site at a time. They never reached 70% occupancy for an entire month, but weekends filled. Weekdays brought retired travelers, traveling nurses between contracts, and adults who worked from laptops until the mountain internet made them reconsider their professions. Income paid utilities, supplies, Luis's hours, and the second roof repair. It did not replace the reopening money. Walter updated his calculations every Monday and no longer treated the lower figures as proof of failure. Ruth learned the reservation program well enough to dislike it accurately. She also began losing words when tired, not important words. The propane company became the people with the truck. A can opener became that sharp wheel. Once she placed the office keys in the common room refrigerator and accused Walter of moving them before Evelyn found them beside the potato salad. No one laughed. Ruth did too loudly. Denise did not turn the incident into a verdict. She asked whether Ruth would schedule an appointment. "Because of one refrigerated key," Ruth said. "Because you've mentioned forgetting words 3 times. I mentioned it twice. 4 then." Walter watched Ruth over the breakfast table. He did not speak for her. That mattered. "I'll schedule it," she said. The evaluation took most of a morning. The doctor asked about sleep, mood, medications, headaches, daily tasks, and whether Ruth ever got lost. She completed memory exercises she found insulting until she missed 2 items and found them frightening. There was no single answer. Her basic screening results were reassuring, but exhaustion and anxiety could affect attention and recall. The doctor ordered routine blood work, recommended better sleep, fewer 14-hour days, and follow-up if anything worsened. Ruth left without catastrophe or certainty. Denise waited outside the exam room, but did not ask the doctor questions over Ruth's head. On the drive home, Ruth said, "I was hoping for a certificate." "Of what? Competence?" They stopped issuing those after people began laminating them. Ruth looked out the window. "I'm afraid, I know, don't make it useful yet." Denise gripped the steering wheel. "Okay." They drove the rest of the way without a plan. At Pine Hollow, Evelyn took over 2 additional closing shifts. Ruth resented the arrangement for 3 days and then slept 9 hours. Mark remained outside the campground's new rhythm until August. He arrived after supper in his work truck, no magnetic sign on the door and no toolbox in the bed. His shirt was damp beneath the arms. Walter was closing the office. Ruth sat at the common room table adding receipts. "Where is everybody?" Mark asked. "Campers are at their sites," Ruth said. "Evelyn went to Asheville for 2 nights. Luis finished at 5. So, it's just you and your father." "That's what I meant?" Walter came through the doorway. "How's work?" Mark laughed once. "I'm selling the truck." Ruth set down her pen. He had told Natalie. She had discovered the amount was no longer $42,000. Fees, interest, and another slow month had pushed it above 50. They had argued for 2 days. Natalie moved their shared savings into an account requiring both signatures. Not to punish him, Mark insisted, but to keep him from making another private solution. "She thinks I lied to her," he said. "You did," Ruth replied. "I was trying to protect her from information about her own life." Mark stared at the floor. "You sound like her." "I like Natalie. Everybody likes Natalie." Walter pulled out a chair. "Sit down." Mark remained standing. His gaze moved around the common room, the long table, the framed photograph, the posted schedules, the shelves of donated mugs. You built all this. We cleaned a room, Ruth said, with people you barely know. We know them. You know what I mean. No, Walter said. Tell us. Mark's face tightened. Luis gets paid. Evelyn gets a seasonal site and wages. Joe gets whatever she charges. You put money into roofs and wiring and gravel, but when I tell you I'm drowning, suddenly every dollar has a moral attached to it. Ruth rose slowly. Those people work here. I work. For your customers. I'm your son. Yes. Apparently that means less than being useful. Walter's expression changed. Do not do that, he said. Do what? Turn our refusal to sell our home into proof we don't love you. I didn't say that. You brought an agent. You counted our money before we chose what to do with it. Then you called strangers family, as though that made you less of ours. Mark looked toward Ruth. You are choosing them? Walter stepped between them. The strangers, you mean, he said, did not demand an inheritance in exchange for being concerned about us. The words struck with enough force that Mark took one step back. Ruth saw Walter regret them immediately. He did not take them back. Mark's eyes reddened. I never demanded anything. You planned around it. Fine. Mark nodded. You win. Keep the campground. Pay everybody but me. Have your dinners. He turned toward the door. Your mother said you're selling the truck, Walter said. Mark stopped. What work do you have left? Walter asked. Small repairs. Nothing worth discussing. Can you repair cabins? Mark faced him. You know I can. Cabin 1 needs new steps and a window frame. Cabin 2 has rot under the back sill. Luis inspected both. Ruth understood before Mark did. Walter continued. We can afford the steps and window this season. The sill waits unless income improves. You submit an estimate. Luis reviews it. If it's fair, we hire you. Mark's mouth opened. No advance, Ruth said. No loan hidden inside the price. Written invoices. He looked from her to Walter. You'd make me bid against Luis? Luis doesn't want the carpentry, Walter said. He recommended the rate. You talked about this? We talked about the cabins, Ruth said, not rescuing you. Mark's anger returned because anger was easier to hold than the other thing. 2 cabin repairs won't solve $50,000. No, Walter said. Then what is this? Work. I'm your son. We established that, Ruth said. You're also a contractor. Mark rubbed his eyes with one hand. Natalie wants me to take a job with a commercial company. That sounds sensible, Walter said. I built my own business, and it may be time to build something else. You reopen a dead campground and call it courage. I consider saving my business, and you call it denial. No one answered quickly. Ruth looked around the common room. Some nights it was full. Tonight it held 3 tired people and the smell of yesterday's coffee. Pine Hollow had not been saved by wanting it. It had survived because they reduced it, changed it, accepted help, and surrendered the version that required them to do everything. We did not reopen the old campground, she said. We admitted we couldn't. Mark looked at her. That was the price, Ruth continued. Not the money. If you want the cabin work, send the estimate. If you want help looking at your numbers, your father and I will sit with you and Natalie. We will not lie for you, lend you money you cannot repay, or sell this place to spare you a decision. Outside, an owl called from the upper loop. Mark stood for a long moment, his face turned away. Then he picked up one of the blank estimate forms beside the receipt box. I'll look at cabin 1, he said. Tomorrow, Walter replied. There are guests sleeping. Mark folded the form once and placed it in his shirt pocket. At the door, he paused. Does Luis really think my rate is fair? Walter pulled out the chair he had offered before. Sit down, and I'll show you what he wrote. Mark hesitated. Then he came back to the table. Walter unfolded Luis's notes and placed them between Mark's hands. The recommended rate was lower than Mark had charged homeowners during his best years, and higher than he seemed to expect from his parents. He added too much for the steps, Mark said. He said the old stringers may not come out cleanly, Walter replied. They won't. Then he did not add too much. Mark read the materials list. You need pressure-treated lumber. That is what it says. I have leftover cedar. Ruth sat across from him. Is that the business version of old wire? What? Nothing. Use what the estimate requires. Mark gave her a tired look, but he did not argue. He inspected cabin 1 the next morning with Luis present. Walter watched from the folding chair and offered no advice until Mark asked where the original foundation blocks had been placed. Ruth considered marking the date on the calendar. The estimate arrived by email that afternoon. It had a proper breakdown for labor and materials. No rounded number concealing a loan. No request for an advance. At the bottom, Mark had written that work could begin the following Monday, provided the cabin remained unoccupied. Luis reviewed it and circled one materials price. "He can get this cheaper," he said. "Should we tell him?" Walter asked. "That's what reviewing means." Mark corrected the price and resubmitted the estimate. Ruth and Walter signed it. He worked alone the first day. On the second, he brought a younger carpenter from the commercial company Natalie wanted him to join. The man was 32, talked very little, and called Mark boss until Mark finally said, "Not on this job." Mark repaired the steps, replaced the window frame, and found less damage beneath the landing than expected. He deducted the unused labor from his invoice. Walter studied the deduction as if it were a private message. "Pay him," Ruth said. "I was going to." "You were staring. I am allowed to appreciate arithmetic." Mark did not use the payment to rescue Mercer Homeworks. He deposited it into the account Natalie monitored and accepted a supervisory job with the commercial company. He sold the equipment he could not justify keeping and arranged payments with his suppliers. None of it happened gracefully. He complained about reporting to someone younger than he was. He missed the freedom of choosing his jobs and blamed the company's scheduling software for several problems that were clearly his own. Natalie came to supper at Pine Hollow without him once, which told Ruth more about their marriage than either was willing to say. "He's trying," Natalie said. "Is trying enough?" Ruth asked. "Not yet." They ate peach cobbler in the common room, while Evelyn explained the reservation system in unnecessary detail. Natalie listened with the grave attention of a woman relieved to be discussing somebody else's accounts. Mark finished cabin 1 before Labor Day. The steps were square, the window opened without sticking, and he painted the trim the same weathered green as the office. He sent an invoice instead of carrying it to the house. Walter paid it the day it arrived. Trust did not return with the payment. Mark still checked property values online. Ruth knew because he accidentally sent Walter a listing for a campground in Tennessee. Walter still softened unpleasant facts when he spoke to Mark, and Ruth still mistook suspicion for wisdom whenever her son mentioned money. But Mark began calling before he came. Sometimes that was the entire improvement. Pine Hollow's first season grew quieter after Labor Day. The summer travelers moved south. Weeknight occupancy dropped to 3 or 4 sites, enough that Ruth could hear each vehicle cross the entrance hose from the farmhouse. The bell no longer startled her. Walter's weekly calculations showed that the campground had covered its operating costs, including Luis's labor and Evelyn's wages. It had not recovered the repair money. At the current rate, that would take years, assuming nothing else broke. Something else always broke. The common room refrigerator stopped cooling in September. Site 7's water connection began leaking underground. A guest backed into the bathhouse gutter and offered to repair it with duct tape. Luis posted a new sign on the maintenance board. "Breaking even is not the same as nothing breaks." Walter crossed out the last S in breaks. Luis added it back. The small profits left after the repairs went into a separate campground account. Ruth resisted buying matching chairs for the common room. Evelyn resisted reducing her hours even after the telephone quieted. Joe returned twice and spent both weekends insisting she was a paying guest while repairing a light switch at no charge. "You invoiced us for every other job," Ruth said. "This one annoyed me personally. That is still labor." Joe handed her a bill for $1. Ruth paid it by check. They set the final closing date for the last Saturday in October. Evelyn planned to move her trailer back into storage for winter, though she had already reserved Site 3 for April through November the following year. "Testing takes time," she said. The Last Supper filled every mismatched chair in the common room. Joe brought chili. Luis brought cornbread. The Whitakers returned for the weekend with a pie. Gloria Benton arrived without her sister and announced that she had slept poorly in the silence. Denise came early carrying a cardboard box. "What's in there?" Ruth asked. "Things from your house. If you have cleaned my cupboards again, you may eat outside." "They're mine." Inside were the senior community brochures she had brought after Ruth's fall. Ruth had forgotten Denise took them back to Charlotte. Denise laid them on the common room counter, cheerful dining rooms, landscaped walking paths, and silver-haired couples laughing over glasses of water. Walter picked one up. "This place has pickleball." "You don't play pickleball?" Ruth said. "I might be exceptional. You cannot feel two fingers. Neither finger is required." Denise laughed and put the brochures back in the box. After supper, everyone gathered around the fire ring beside the office. The October air carried wood smoke downhill through the pines. Walter sat in his folding chair. Ruth wore 2 sweaters and refused the blanket Denise tried to put over her knees until Denise tossed it onto the empty chair beside her without comment. Ruth picked it up 5 minutes later. Luis asked what Denise planned to do with the box. "I thought we could use it for kindling." Ruth looked at her daughter. Denise took out the first brochure and tore off the blank back page. "Not because these places are bad." "No," Ruth said. "Or because you'll never need something different. No. Just because I don't get to choose it before you do." She fed the page into the fire. The flames caught one corner and curled it black. Walter handed her another. "Save the pickleball," he said. Denise tore around the photograph and gave it to him. They burned the brochures a few pages at a time, mixed with twigs and split oak. No one applauded. Evelyn used one page to relight a marshmallow stick after the end went out. Mark arrived while Denise was dropping the final scrap into the fire. He wore his commercial company shirt beneath an unbuttoned jacket. He had come directly from work and carried a white envelope. "You missed supper," Ruth said. "I know. There's chili. I ate in the truck. Then there's better chili." He handed the envelope to Walter. "Cabin 1. Final invoice." Walter opened it beneath the firelight, though Ruth knew he had already received the same invoice by email. "Window sticks when it rains," Mark said. "Call me if it does." "You guaranteed it?" Walter asked. "I guarantee my work." "Good." Walter folded the invoice along its existing crease. Mark looked toward the fire. "What are we burning?" "My plans for their future," Denise said. He gave her a wary glance, then saw the brochures. "Those places aren't cheap." Ruth expected the sentence to spoil the evening. Mark pushed both hands into his jacket pockets. "I looked at one outside Greensboro. Their base rate doesn't include much." "Thank you," Ruth said. "Your timing remains a gift. I'm just saying." Walter gestured toward the empty chair beside him. "Sit down." Mark sat. No one told him he was forgiven. He did not apologize again. After a while, he asked Luis whether the sill on cabin 2 could wait until spring. "It can," Luis said. "If we brace the corner before winter. I could come next Saturday." "Paid," Ruth said. Mark looked at her. "I know. Written estimate. I know. Luis approves the rate. Mom?" She held up both hands. Mark smiled despite himself. It was not the broad smile he used when avoiding something. It was smaller and more tired. "I know," he said again. Walter paid the final invoice on his phone while Mark sat beside him. A minute later, Mark's phone vibrated. He looked at the payment notice and put the phone away. Across the fire, Denise met Ruth's eyes. Nothing had been solved in a single evening. Ruth trusted that more than she would have trusted a speech. The following morning, Evelyn printed the final reservation report. Ruth entered the last payment into the account, closed the laptop, and placed the paper report inside the old ledger. The notes she had written during the season filled several pages. Benton sisters, separate beds if possible. Whittakers, arrive early, bring pie. Palmer, Joe, will fix things even when told not to. Under Site 3, she had written only, Evelyn, coming back. They drained the bathhouse lines under Luis's supervision. Joe switched off the unused circuits. Walter posted winter warning signs at the upper loop and did not climb once. At the gate, he wrapped a new chain around the posts. The old rusted chain lay in the equipment shed because Ruth had not decided whether it was trash or history. "Too tight," she said. Walter loosened it by one link. "Better?" "Yes." Evelyn stood beside her silver trailer, hitched to the white sedan. Mark had shown her a safer route out that avoided the steepest turn. She hugged Ruth, then Walter, then Luis, though she had already arranged to return for Thanksgiving dinner at the farmhouse. Joe drove out next. The Whitakers followed. Each vehicle crossed the entrance hose, and the bell rang until the road was empty. Walter locked the gate. The new sign above it read, "Closed for winter, reopening in April." They rode the utility cart back to the farmhouse. Walter drove. Ruth held the yellow bathhouse key disc and the reservation ledger on her lap. Railings had been added to both sides of the porch. A light came on automatically as the sky darkened. Denise had helped them write a plan for winter storms, and Luis would check the house if the road iced over. Walter no longer drove after dark. Ruth closed the office twice a week before she became too tired to remember why she had entered a room. They were not living alone. That had never been the same as being unable to choose their life. Walter parked beside the porch and switched off the cart. In the quiet, Ruth could still hear the last gate bell fading among the pines. "April," he said. "April," she agreed. He took the ledger. She carried the keys. Together, without hurrying, they went inside.